When life itself feels worthless, what meaning can survival hold? On the edge of despair, the world shatters into blood and chaos. From broken phones spill nightmares once thought imaginary, goblins, orcs, beasts of hunger. And in the middle of that hell, a boy who wished to die chooses to live. Is life still misery? Or has tragedy revealed its hidden light? Let's find out. The protagonist, Rikuto Kurogane, had such a terrible life that he came to say goodbye to it on the roof of his school. He glanced at the school children happily strolling below and decided to put an end to this terrible game. He clutched the fence, remembering how his adoptive parents treated him. They scolded him and beat him simply for not cleaning the house. And when his father caught his gaze after yet another beating, he became even more angry and began to beat him while he was lying down, saying that order in the house was his responsibility. Who gave him a roof over his head after his parents died? His mother, with a handcuffed smile, said that it was no wonder he grew up like that, with such and such parents. MC hated them, and when they finally calmed down, his older brother Sarada would come to mock him. Looking at him, he laughed and, deliberately spilling soda on the floor, said with a smile that it was his fault. He didn't react to this in any way, and he walked up to him and patted him on the shoulder, asking if he wasn't kind. He gives him something that gives him at least some value. He clenched his fist, but he couldn't answer him. At school, everyone was still bullying him. It was a normal school day, but when he entered his classroom, he found a vase of flowers and a bunch of bad graffiti on his desk. His classmates laughed at him, and when the teacher entered the classroom, he, of course, saw what had happened to his desk, but decided not to interfere and exclaimed, what had he done to his seat? He hated this terrible school very much. He also hated these scumbags who constantly cornered him and demanded money. When this happened again, he punched the wall behind him in rage, but seeing Takeda, the leader of these idiots, as his brother saying he was just useless trash, he trembled with fear and gave in. Then, this guy kicked him in the stomach, making him feel sick, then followed up with another blow, this time to the head. The guy exclaimed that he had told him to bring money. Since he had nothing, he needed to steal it from his parents' wallet. While he was being beaten, he thought that life really was that terrible. Everything was terrible, but he was even more terrible. Because of this idiot's beating, his phone fell out of his hands. He looked at it without a single emotion and was about to pick it up, but Takeda stepped on it, but it was as if he had been expecting this. The bully smirked and apologized to him, saying that his foot simply slipped. And when he was about to hit him on the head, a guy named Nishituya grabbed his shoulder and stopped him. They were very surprised to see him because he was the best on the archery team, the same guy who recently won the national tournament and the dream of all the girls in school. They were delighted that such a wonderful guy was helping a loser like Rikuto. Takeda became nervous, feeling how hard he was squeezing his shoulder, and asked what he wanted. His friend Tani rushed at him with a bat in his hands, telling him not to be insolent. But Tuya punched him in the face, causing him to fall, and told them to stop it and get out of here. He gave them a threatening look, and Takeda clicked his tongue in displeasure, threw the hand off his shoulder, and then told his guys to leave. After watching them go, Tuya sighed with relief, then sat down next to Rikuto and asked if he was okay. He should at least try to fight back. They were acting this way because he wasn't doing anything in response. Could he really live like this? MC silently picked up his broken phone, then abruptly stood up and left, irritably asking what he even knew about him. Tuya frowned slightly and noticed that something was still strange. After such a severe beating, he was standing confidently on his feet. Did he have less damage than he thought? Maybe this guy unconsciously dodged their blows at the last moment? He decided to push this thought aside. After all, they weren't at a movie, and left. After a while, Rikuto went up to the roof. He looked at the school children who were having a wonderful time, chatting and playing among themselves, and this made him feel uneasy. He sat down on the floor, thought about something for a second, then looked at his broken phone and sighed heavily, saying that this was the end. He was just tired of this. This whole life was one big torment. He climbed onto the fence and, looking down at the city from above, spread his arms out to the sides and said with a wide smile that it was time to end this game. Suddenly, lightning flashed in the sky. Some glowing symbols appeared, from which endless numbers cascaded down and exploded, colliding with buildings. All the phones meanwhile began to shock their owners. The students dropped them from their hands in pain and began to wonder what was going on here. Their phones began to act strangely. They didn't understand what was happening at all, and Rikuto meanwhile thought, was that just lightning? Even though the weather is so nice? What's even going on? He heard screams from below. One of the students fell to the ground in fear and looked at his phone. Various numbers flashed on the screen, changing rapidly, and then these numbers literally began to crawl out of the phone, taking the form of a monster. The guy looked at it in shock, and the numbers turned into a goblin, and then monsters of all kinds, from goblins and orcs to dragons, crawled out of other phones. The students ran in terror, but the monsters quickly caught up with them, while MC, meanwhile, watched this bloody spectacle in shock from above. One of the goblins aimed at a guy who, unable to escape, was hit on the head with a spiked club, while his fellow monsters successfully dealt with the others. The goblin licked his lips and then continued to kill the poor students one by one, along with the others. Rikuto watched this and couldn't believe his eyes, and when the monsters gathered a huge pile of dead students, he asked, "What the hell is going on here?" On this day, hordes of mysterious monsters suddenly appeared all over the world. Public order was instantly disrupted, and it is believed that the world population decreased by more than 10 times. The cause of the cataclysm remained unknown until a group of young people uncovered the truth. At first, it was only known that the monsters appeared from phones. The survivors called this day the Day of Judgment. Back to the beginning of this day, MC watched the horror below and thought that monsters that only exist in fairy tales were killing people one by one. It was all incredibly unexpected. Not believing it, he laughed nervously and said that he understood everything. He had already jumped and died, and this was just a death dream. Screams were heard, monsters grabbed people and did whatever they wanted to them. Looking at them, Rikuto laughed and remarked that it was all so disgusting. All those who despised him turned into trash. He smiled and asked how they felt about it. They bullied him all the time, so they deserved it. Let them all die and burn in hell. He continued to watch this massacre, and at one point, he felt uneasy and wondered if this was too realistic for a dream. There were people here he didn't know. He noticed a guy who was trying to run away from the school grounds, but the monster quickly caught up with him and hit him. Hearing his heartrending scream, MC clenched his teeth and grabbed his head, exclaiming, "What the hell is going on? How much longer will this dream last? Why doesn't he die? His life is terrible. His parents died, and he is left alone, and only idiots have appeared around him. And this brother, he doesn't care about any of them." As if he cares, but he understood that everything that is happening now is wrong. He burst into tears and exclaimed that in any case, it is wrong that people die like this. He grabbed his head and screamed that if this was a dream, then let him wake up. At that moment, the door to the roof slammed open with such a bang that it shattered the window. He turned around in fear and saw a goblin walking towards him with someone's head in his hand. He looked at it in horror and thought, "Is this a dream?" The moment the goblin approached him and pounced on him, he realized that this was all for real, absolutely reality. Seeing the monster swinging its weapon at him, he cried out in fear and immediately jumped aside, falling nearby. He trembled in pain and slowly got up, thinking about why he was so scared, and when the goblin jumped down and he looked at the girl's face, forever frozen in horror, he understood what death looked like. He was very scared and backed away, wondering if he was going to die like this. There was a sound behind him. His image asked, "What difference does it make?" He was going to die anyway. He wanted to end this life. He remained silent and thought he was right. After all, his life was terrible, and the world wasn't so great either. Nothing would change if he died. He smiled slightly and closed his eyes, expecting to die at the hands of a goblin. But remembering how the other students at this school had died painfully, he realized he didn't want to die. Definitely not like this. Gritting his teeth, he picked up a pipe lying nearby and blocked the blow, shouting that he didn't want to die. There was a loud clang of steel hitting steel. The monster was stronger and pushed him onto his back, but he continued to hold the pipe, preventing it from hitting him, and said that real death was disgusting and too pitiful. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to hold back its onslaught, and he wondered, knowing what death was like, who in their right mind would even want to die? Thinking about this, he became more and more powerful and shouted that he didn't want to die. Not that he wanted to die in the first place. His strength increased and he rose abruptly, but the goblin was stronger and began to press on him, and he screamed loudly, trying to move it. And at that moment, he froze. Everything around him seemed to stop. People have a state called the zone, which is when concentration surpasses all limits, regardless of the cause, and a person enters a state of perfect control over their body and mind. It is said that when someone enters the zone, they gain a complete understanding of the world around them, and can reflexively and intuitively make the best decisions. He then raised his legs sharply, hitting the goblin between the legs, and of course, like anyone else, he fell to the floor from such a blow. Rikuto, meanwhile, had gotten up and caught his breath, then ran up to him with a loud scream and hit him on the head with a pipe. But that wasn't enough. He struck him again, then a second and a third, until the pipe crushed his skull. Satisfied that he was definitely dead, he stopped and caught his breath. And when he looked at the goblin's head, nausea suddenly rose in his throat and he vomited. Wiping away his drool, he spread his arms out to the sides and screamed loudly, pouring out all his emotions. Until now, he hadn't truly lived, so now deep down he feels that he doesn't want to die. He looked at the sun, which was already starting to set, and smiled slightly, after which his eyes slowly closed and he lost consciousness. Soon he heard someone's voice. This person was trying to wake him up, and when he finally opened his eyes, he got up in fear. It was Tuya. He was glad that he was alive and said that blood was pouring out of his head. He was already afraid that he had died. MC looked at him with a confused look. He recognized him. A second later, a sharp pain pierced his head, but despite this, he got up and Tuya worriedly asked him not to overdo it. But Rikuto was eager to see what had happened. He looked at the city and, seeing buildings ablaze, grinned nervously and said that this couldn't be true. He heard someone crying behind him, and he immediately turned around to see a crowd of students sitting in a huddled group, crying in fear. Takeda and his friends, Arata and Tani, who had recently beaten him up, were now clutching their heads and wondering what was going on. Among the crowd was the gym teacher and the girl he was trying to calm down, Kujo Sakura. She was very scared, and Teacher Yama told her with a smile that everything was fine because he would protect them all. His gaze dropped to her chest, and he told her not to worry. The other girls noticed him looking at her like that again and glanced at the teacher with disgust, sympathizing with poor Sakura. MC looked to the side and was slightly surprised to see a barricaded exit to the roof, made of broken chairs and tables. Tuya said it was a barricade to keep monsters out. They made it out of scrap materials. He looked at the wounded students and said that everyone here had escaped from those mysterious monsters. They had desperately fled to the roof and even barricaded themselves. He clutched his head and worriedly said that there were still stragglers there. They asked to be let in, but they were left there. He felt uneasy, as if he blamed himself. He clutched his head and told him everything. The 3 boys who remained behind and were still alive were pounding their fists on the door, begging to be let in. They looked in horror at the goblins quickly approaching them, and again asked to be let in. By this time, the students on the roof had already barricaded the door, and the boys remaining on the landing were trying to break through to them through the only hole, a broken window in the door. The gym teacher said that they couldn't let them in, and another student agreed with him, saying that if they tried to save them, they would die themselves. The boy continued to stretch out his hand to them, begging them to help them. The horde of monsters was already here. Tuya approached the barricade. He wanted to help these poor guys, but his hand froze the moment he screamed loudly and asked the monsters to stop. He stood there and continued to listen to their screams, not daring to help, and when everything went quiet, he lowered his hand. Now he told Rikuto that back then, deep down, he felt that he wanted to survive, that he didn't want to open the door for them. He felt guilty that he couldn't help them, and now he reproached himself for it. But Rikuto said that it wasn't his fault. He turned to him worriedly, and Rikuto looked at the dead goblin and said that no one wants to die so horribly and miserably, and he did everything he could to survive. Tuya asked in surprise, so it was he who killed him? He laughed nervously and remarked that he was cool, then said with a smile that he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. It would never have occurred to him to try it, and he is usually so confident. He looked at his shaking hand and cursed, saying that if he had only thought of such a solution, he could have saved those guys. MC remained silent, after which the gym teacher asked everyone to gather, and they joined the students lined up in front of him. First, the teacher asked them to assess the situation. Today, around noon, strange monsters suddenly crawled out of phones. Is that right? Sakura raised her hand with the phone and confirmed his words, saying that they crawled out of it. She tried to turn on the phone, but it did not respond at all, and then a guy approached her, asking if her phone was also dead. The others checked their phones. They turned out to have exactly the same problem, and Tuya wanted to check it out too. He asked Rikuto what he had, and he showed him his broken phone in response. The teacher cursed, realizing that they couldn't even call for help now, and MC thoughtfully asked what that meant. Tuya asked what he meant, and he said that the monsters came out of the phones, and now they all have no battery. It must be somehow connected. He figured that besides, no one appeared from his phone. Is it because it's broken? The teacher meanwhile waved his hand and said that they appeared out of nowhere. In any case, they need to remain calm. They will just wait until the police or military rescues them. Did they understand everything? The students remained silent. Only Rikuto was unhappy with his proposal and said that he must be joking. The teacher was slightly taken aback by his words, and he stood up, confidently saying that the monsters appeared from the phone, which means they appeared all over the city, and not just at school. Realizing he was right, the students started whispering among themselves, and he said that given the prevalence of phones these days, it was likely the same situation all over the world. Therefore, he doubted the police or military were in a position to act right now. Everyone grabbed their heads, realizing how bad the situation was, and Tuya suggested they find a safer place instead of sitting there. MC agreed with him and added that they should do so if they didn't want to die. Takeda started to get irritated by his words and stood up, asking why he was giving orders here. He smiled evilly and walked up to him, grabbed him by the clothes, and said that apparently he wouldn't understand until he beat him again. He started shaking him, demanding an answer, but Rikuto still remained silent and just looked at him, not understanding what was wrong with him. Why was he even talking such nonsense in a situation like this? The others agreed with Takeda and angrily asked Rikuto to be more modest, and Tuya hastened to calm them down. Sakura also sided with him and asked them all to stick together, while Takeda shook Rikuto and asked what was wrong with him. Was he so scared that he couldn't even make a sound? MC remained silent and thought that he was like an angry chihuahua compared to that monster. His lack of response only made Takeda even more angry, so he told him not to bother him with every little thing. It was annoying. Hearing this, the students became nervous. They all knew what was about to happen. Takeda, of course, became angry and attacked him with his fists, exclaiming, "Does he even understand who he's talking to?" Tuya quickly intervened and told him to stop. But this time, the MC wouldn't stand for it. He grabbed the offender by the arm, then grabbed him around the neck and shoved his face into the floor, causing his nose to bleed. Tuya and everyone else were shocked that such a loser was now capable of anything, and Rikuto began to tug on Takeda's arm, causing pain and begging him to let go. Looking at him, the MC sighed heavily and wondered why he was afraid of him in the first place. Hearing these words, the guy shouted in rage that he was finished, and he squeezed his hand tighter. The guy shouted that he wouldn't let it go, and he looked at him with irritation, then began to twist his arm, saying that he was so annoying. He pressed on his neck, preventing him from moving, and Tuya, realizing that he could really break his arm, pulled Rikuto away and ordered him to stop. Takeda began to writhe on the floor in pain, and Tuya looked at Rikuto in surprise and thought that he was crazy. He really almost broke his arm. And this is really the same guy who was bullied before? The others started discussing what just happened. And then Takeda stood up and called Rikuto an idiot, saying that he would kill him. Tuya immediately walked up to him and shouted that now is not the time to swear. Let him finally shut up. Deciding not to argue with him, he stepped aside, and then Tuya turned to Rikuto and said that he shouldn't argue either. It was all in the past. He agreed and said that instead it was better to figure out what they could do. Takeda glared at him furiously, calling him an idiot. After which, MC suggested the teacher continue the discussion. The teacher nervously agreed, and after they discussed everything, Tuya went to the center to summarize. There is nothing on the roof, and they don't know when help will arrive. In the worst case, help might not show up at all, so they need to find shelter at all costs. They need food and water, but Rikuto interrupted him, saying that they should get weapons if possible, and Sakura raised her hand, worriedly asking what they should do. Did a safe place even exist? Tuya pointed out that this was the problem. MC said that in any case, they need to find out what's inside. They can't start anything if they don't know if it's even possible to get out of here. Saito Shinjiro exclaimed that he was against it. It was too dangerous. There could still be monsters there, so they needed to sit here and wait for help. The teacher said that Rikuto was actually right. They should at least check the corridor. This made the students nervous and said he had to be joking. Who would volunteer to go into a monster lair anyway? The teacher chickened out and said that Rikuto and Takeda would go and assess the situation inside the building. MC remained silent, and Takeda became very indignant. He stood up and pointed his finger at him, exclaiming, "Shouldn't a teacher lead by example in situations like this?" He replied that he would stay here and protect the students. The girls sided with the teacher, told them to go there. They were men after all, and then a loud clanging sound was heard. Rikuto picked up his weapon and dragged it along the floor behind him, involuntarily attracting attention, and approached the barricade. Takeda called out to him excitedly and asked if he was serious. He responded by asking what he meant. The longer they stayed here, the worse the situation would get. They would either die of hunger or become food for the monsters. In any case, death was inevitable, but he refused to die. Therefore, there was no choice but to act. His words delighted the girls, and they now looked at him differently, and Tuya was surprised. He grinned nervously, then picked up his bag and remarked that he had said well. He was right. He stood next to him and declared with a smile that he would go too. After all, there might still be survivors there. Since everyone's favorite student was leaving, the teacher became worried and asked him to wait. If anything happened to him, he would be held responsible. The girls also asked the guy not to leave because they were very worried that their sweet boy could die, and he sighed heavily and mentally noted that they were all hypocrites. MC said that, to be honest, he was glad that he went. This chihuahua apparently was not going to go. Tuya did not understand who he called that, and seeing that he was pointing at the frightened Takeda, he covered his smile with his hand and noted that he really did look like a chihuahua. Rikuto turned to him and asked, "Is he sure? This will be a very dangerous foray. He thinks the chances of dying are quite high." He answered him that he thinks the same way as he does. He does not want to die. He has his reasons. He remembered some girl who must be waiting for him and declared that he refuses to die in such a place. MC grinned and remarked that he was a reliable friend, but he disagreed, as his nerves weren't as frayed as his. He awkwardly scratched the back of his head, saying that he still hadn't learned his name, and he introduced himself with a smile, then asked, "What's his name?" He asked in response, "Don't you know who he is?" He told him his name, and he said he understood, which made Tuya laugh at him, then called him partner, and said he was counting on him. They cleared the barricade, and, nervously glancing at the dark staircase ahead, headed into the lion's den. They went down one floor. The corridor was quiet and dark. Glancing at the dead students, Tuya nervously noted that this was like a bad dream. Rikuto said that unfortunately, this wasn't a dream, but reality, and his partner wondered where all the monsters had gone. It wasn't that he was complaining, but it was just too quiet here. MC assumed they went into town because the school was already empty. He suspected there was almost no prey left here, so they left in search of a better place, like this one. Tuya said it was possible, but it was so terrible. Hearing a sound, he froze, and when Rikuto was about to say something, he waved his hand and whispered that he should be quiet. They both froze and listened, then exchanged glances and cautiously continued on. Tuya quietly peeked around the corner and saw a goblin looking around for prey, after which he whispered to Rikuto, "Can they handle him?" He hesitantly answered that it was possible, and then the guy took off his bag from his back and placed it on the floor. He pulled out a bow and arrow and said he was ready. After that, he carefully stepped out from behind the corner, drew an arrow, took aim, and then fired. The arrow pierced the goblin's back, and its tip appeared on the other side of his body. But even though it was wounded in the chest, the goblin was still able to move. Breathing heavily in pain, he turned to look at whoever did this and growled loudly in rage. Tuya became excited and pulled out another arrow, but before he could aim and fire, the goblin quickly approached him. Rikuto joined the fight, running behind the goblin, swung his pipe, and hit him in the head with all his might, causing him to be thrown to the side and hit the wall. His body trembled as he tried to get up, and hearing several quick steps behind him, he turned around. MC raised the pipe above his head and then began to beat the monster. When he finally killed him, he caught his breath, and his new friend crouched down next to the goblin to get a closer look, noting that it was brutal. Rikuto asked if he could hear the others. He replied that no one else was coming, then said with a smile that it was cool. MC hesitantly agreed with him, and, remembering those huge dragons, thought that there were some that humans didn't stand a chance against. Tuya asked what exactly they were. They were clearly monsters from some video game. They seemed to be goblins. Rikuto agreed with him, and said that when he saw the other monsters, he had the feeling he'd seen them somewhere before. Tuya glanced at his trembling hand and laughed nervously, noting that in the game they would die in one hit. But here, in reality, they put their lives on the line. MC wiped the blood off the pipe with a rag and agreed with him, saying that they have no levels, no cool skills, and no magic. They're just people. The guy said he was different. He's definitely not a beginner, is he? He knows how to handle a weapon. Did someone really train him? Rikuto looked away and remained silent. He remembered how he used to train with his older brother in swordsmanship, but every time he ended up on the floor without a weapon, and he mocked him. He closed his eyes and told Tuya that no one taught him, and he asked, with such courage and movements, why were these guys mocking him? He told him that he had no idea, and then they continued on their way. Several classrooms were destroyed. Only bodies lay everywhere. Tuya looked around and noticed that it was pretty quiet here. Apparently, this goblin was alone on the 6th floor. MC said that there were mainly training halls here, so there weren't many people. However, there could be monsters down there. Tuya grew nervous and agreed with him, and then they approached the stairs, where he said things would get more serious. Rikuto decided to clarify something and said that their goal was to assess the situation. The guy replied that he understood. Who was at the school? How many were there? And was it possible to escape? They couldn't act until they knew at least that. MC agreed and said that the most important thing now was to return alive and with information. Therefore, if he thought it was necessary to escape, he would leave him, and he should leave him too, if necessary. Tuya remained silent, lost in thought, then patted him on the shoulder and agreed with him, adding that the situation was urgent. No sentimentality. Rikuto closed his eyes with a smile and then started to walk down, and Tuya said that he was kind of cruel. He turned around, looking at him questioningly. He awkwardly scratched his cheek and was about to say something, but suddenly a cry for help was heard. MC flinched, then immediately started running, and Tuya called out to him excitedly, asking him to wait, but he didn't listen at all. And he noted that he was exactly as he imagined. He would abandon him, even though he couldn't abandon the others. It seemed he would have to keep an eye on him. He ran after him. Meanwhile, a monster that had killed all the small goblins was wandering down the hallway below, breathing heavily. Meanwhile, in some classroom, a girl named Tachibana Kotone was hiding in a locker, afraid to make a sound. Her classmates were screaming outside. The goblins had stripped them and were getting to work, but not before killing all the boys. One of the girls, Misaki, screamed loudly, asking the goblin to stop, while Kotone covered her mouth in horror and thought that she needed to help her. But why should she leave here? She trembled with fear, continuing to watch Misaki, who tearfully begged the goblin not to do this and promised to do whatever he wanted. But he only screamed loudly in response and then hit her. Blood spurted in all directions under her screams, and Kotone, unable to listen any longer, grabbed her head and tried to convince herself that she was dreaming and needed to wake up quickly. But she understood that all of this was reality and apologized to her friend. She slowly slid down the wall and began to beg her forgiveness for not being able to do anything, for constantly running away. She remembered witnessing Rikuto being bullied once. She stood in the middle of a crowd of onlookers while he was being beaten. She knew it was all wrong and that she had to stop them. But just as she plucked up her courage and was about to ask the bullies to stop, Takeda slapped Rikuto in the face and ordered him to look at him. She became scared and fell silent, silently apologizing to him. She stood there for a while, watching him, and then Saito distracted her, saying that class would start soon. He grabbed her hand and led her to school, and she turned around worriedly to Rikuto, who was left all alone. She didn't notice how she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she opened her eyes in fear and thought, did she lose consciousness? What happened to Misaki and the others? And what was that sound? How long had she been unconscious? She took out her phone to check the time, but accidentally dropped it, and there was a crash. She covered her mouth in horror and realized that the sound outside had stopped. She cringed in fear and continued to sit quietly. About a minute passed, she thought they were gone and breathed a sigh of relief, But at that moment, the locker swung open and she saw 2 goblins, and behind them a pile of her dead classmates. Misaki was already dead too. She looked at her friend in horror and burst into tears. And then, one of the goblins grabbed her by the hair and pulled her out of the locker. She screamed in fear, realizing what was about to happen, and the goblin licked his lips, then threw her to the floor and tore her clothes. She screamed loudly, mentally asking for at least someone to come to her aid, and breathed heavily from fear. Looking at those disgusting mugs above her, she closed her eyes and cried, and then the sound of a blow and splashing blood was heard. Warm blood splashed on her face, and she opened her eyes to see a huge monster dispatching the goblin on top of her. He growled, his gaze fixed on her, and she began to stutter in fear. The other goblins weren't thrilled with the way he dealt with their comrade, and they grabbed their weapons and surrounded him, making disgruntled noises. He turned sharply and swung his club, dispatching them in an instant, while Kotone crawled to the wall and watched. As soon as she caught the monster's gaze, she pursed her lips and burst into tears, then called loudly for help. Tuya and Rikuto, meanwhile, were already on their way. The huge monster grabbed her and carried her out of the classroom, tying up the goblins and dragging them along with him. The girl looked at him, begging for mercy, and he, unable to bear her whining and screaming any longer, slammed her back against the wall with all his might, and she lost consciousness and finally fell silent. Meanwhile, the boys were hiding around the corner. Seeing such a monster, Tuya became very nervous and wondered if he would even be able to defeat it with arrows. MC said that now he understood everything. His friend asked what he meant, and he said that there were somehow not enough monsters on the upper floors, so they found the reason for it. Now Tuya understood everything. Simply put, monsters have the same hierarchy as animals. The stronger feed on the weak, and among all the people they met, he is the strongest, but they definitely can't cope with such a monster. What should they do? If they leave everything as is, then the girl will die. Rikuto stood up, and he worriedly grabbed his shoulder, asking where he was going. He answered him that they need to save her. She is still alive. The guy asked, is life really not that valuable to him? He must understand that they are no match for this giant. And what is the point of this heroism? For some kind of justice? Self-affirmation? That he decided to save a girl from trouble? And he is ready to risk his life for this? MC said that when they first met, he asked him, can he really live like this? Indeed, he lived so badly that at some point he wanted to end it, to stop his eternal torment in his own skin. But when he came face to face with death, he realized that he wants to live no matter what. No matter how terrible his life was, he wants to live. That is why he wants to save her. He wants to save those who wish to live longer. Tuya nervously clenched his teeth and noted that he is really out of his mind. He wants to live so much that he is ready to put his own life on the line. Is this his meaning of life? Rikuto said that he didn't have to follow him. He would follow his own desires, and he would follow his own. He thought that everything was right, because he was a loser. He had no loving family, no true friends, no one to support him. No one cared about him. He was like some kind of ghost. These were all his brother's words, and since he was a ghost, he needed to leave this world as soon as possible. He looked down and told him in his mind that he was not going to leave this world. He headed into the corridor where that monster was, and Tuya grabbed his shoulder, quietly exclaiming that he had told him to stop. His face became serious, and he told him that he had a younger sister. They were not blood relatives. They even went to different schools. MC didn't understand why he suddenly brought this up, and he said that that was why he couldn't die here. If he died, she would be all alone. But thinking about it now, if it had been his younger sister in that girl's place, what would he have done? Could he protect his sister? Or would he just give up and run away, just like he was doing now? Meeting this big guy really scared him, but he decided to go with him. They would save this girl together. One idiot wants to prove that his survival was worth it, and the other wants to overcome his fears. They make the perfect team, don't they? Rikuto didn't answer him right away. He smiled and remarked that he was completely crazy. Tuya sheepishly asked him to shut up. His courageous way of facing his fears shouldn't be confused with idiocy. Before going to save her, he decided to discuss what they should do. A frontal attack wasn't an option. He would just kill them. MC said that if he really went with him, he had an idea of what they should do. He asked in surprise, so he had a plan all along? He confidently confirmed it and told him how they would proceed. Meanwhile, Kotone woke up. As soon as she opened her eyes, she immediately wondered where she was, and a second later realized she was tied to a pole with a fire burning nearby. Turning around, she saw goblins also tied up, and her face twisted in fear. Quietly sobbing and stuttering, she looked at the monster sitting near the fire devouring someone. When it turned to her, she screamed loudly. Rikuto, meanwhile, heard this and sped up. As they ran, Tuya called out to him with a smile and said that hearing his plan finally convinced him that he had gone mad. Currently, Kotone looked at the fire and thought that this was the end. Will it just eat her or just burn her to the bones? She started crying and said that she didn't want to die. The monster threw the bones away and turned to her when he heard her words and growled. He got to his feet and walked towards her, continuing to growl. He grabbed the stick to which she was tied and threw it on the ground. He lifted her with one hand, holding the stick, and she screamed loudly in fear. He walked towards the fire, and she loudly begged him to let her go. She was very afraid because of what was happening, but the monster heard some sounds and took her away from the fire. The monster walked towards Rikuto, who was standing at the entrance to the office and hitting the floor with a pipe, attracting attention. She looked at him and with a surprised expression said that this can't be. He, with a calm expression, said that she should listen to him and close her eyes right now. The monster looked at him calmly and threw her on the floor. The monster took out his huge club from behind his back and roared loudly. He took out a fire extinguisher that was hung and threw it in the monster's face. Because of what happened, the monster covered his eyes with his hand, and he threw the fire extinguisher on the floor and ran past. He ran up to Kotone, took out a box cutter. She called his name and he apologized and said that he saw her for the first time, but they should discuss it later. She looked at him and wondered, doesn't he remember her? He tried to cut the rope and thought that it was impossible to cut. Is it because of the material? However, he certainly won't be able to carry her tied to a stick in his arms. He raised the pipe above his head and thought that there was no way out. He needed to move on to the second plan. He hit the floor with the pipe several times, and this attracted Tuya's attention. He peeked out from around the corner and said that exactly 3 hits was the signal. Is it really impossible to save her the easy way? So, he's ready to go through with this madness? He ran into the office and loudly declared that he didn't believe in his crazy plan, but there was no way out. He took out an arrow and loudly declared that if he didn't succeed, it would be his own fault. At that moment, the monster came to his senses, approached them, and growled loudly. The protagonist stood up with a pipe in his hands and stood in front of this monster. He swung his huge club to strike, and he looked at this and thought that one mistake and he would go to heaven, but there was no other way. Kotone looked at this with a worried expression and loudly called his name. He swung the pipe with a calm expression, and they crossed their weapons. He was able to parry this monster's attack and redirected it into the ground. The monster was surprised by what happened, and he said with a smile that he hadn't parried anyone's blows for a long time, but his body remembered everything. When he did this, he thought that by fighting openly without dodging the opponent's strike, he was shifting the opponent's vector with his strike. He didn't need to put in too much force. Even a slight shift was enough to follow up with an attack. He hit the monster's leg with the pipe and thought that this was a fairly popular move in kendo. He never forgot his father's instructions and was grateful to him for teaching him this. She looked at what happened in amazement and said that it was incredible. He thought that he should always keep in mind that their opponents were monsters. They are not particularly distinguished by their intellect, being guided more by their instincts. The monster became very angry, swung its weapon, and roared loudly. He ran towards it and swung the pipe. He struck with the club, but he dodged, hit the monster's arm with the pipe, and thought that they turned their rage into blows, wasting a lot of energy in the process. He jumped back and kept a close eye on the monster in front of him. The monster ran towards him, swung its club, and began to roar loudly. He struck the monster on the head with a pipe and thought that it was against such creatures that such a person with such knowledge could defeat him. The monster grabbed its head and roared loudly. Kotone watched in surprise and thought that throughout the entire fight, the monster had not injured him. He was simply incredible. He was breathing heavily from fatigue and thought that fighting such a fight was very difficult. He had held on so far, but his body could no longer withstand such a strain. However, he still did not fall, probably too strong. Of course, he was angry from the pain of parrying, but he could only fight back without attacking directly. He ran forward and thought that he had no choice. He ran to the exit, began banging the pipe on the floor, and loudly said that he had to come here. The monster guessed his plan and took the pole Kotone was tied to. Immediately after that, the monster ran after him, trying to attack with a club, but MC was faster. He growled loudly with anger and continued chasing him, and she looked at him and began to remember the past. As a child, she cried because 2 boys bullied her. He walked up to them and loudly told them to leave her alone. Were they seriously having so much fun bullying her? She called him by name, but now she thought that he had always been like this, protecting everyone, helping everyone except himself. Tuya saw the monster attack with its club from another part of the building. He looked at what was happening with a worried look and thought that this guy had finally brought him here. It seems he is not injured, which means he was able to dodge all of his attacks. However, even from here he can see that he is at his limit. He must endure it a little longer. He must lead him another 10 meters, and then he will come into play. At the same time, they continued running down the corridor, and the monster swung its club to attack him. Rikuto turned to him, swung the pipe, and thought that he couldn't move his arms. He was unable to parry the monster's attack, and was thrown back hard by the club's blow. He was badly hurt by this blow, and was noticed by Tuya, who was hiding nearby around the corner. He became even more worried about this, and thought that things couldn't get any worse. He had told him earlier that he only needed to aim at a certain part of the body. Until he had a good view, he couldn't waste arrows. If he made a mistake, they would all die. He looked at what was happening with a worried look and thought that the monster was still too far away from him. To make a perfect hit, you need to follow 3 rules. You need to consider the distance from the target, the angle of view, and that the enemy cannot see you from cover. If he came even closer to him, if he changes position, he will definitely notice him, and the plan will be over. However, if there is no other way, he will have to. The protagonist crawled along the corridor and loudly said that he should not shoot under any circumstances. He stood up with his pipe and asked, he is still too far from him, right? He must endure a little longer, and he will lead the monster to the right position. The monster slowly walked towards him, While he tried to continue to get away from it, he had no strength. He fell to the floor, turned around, and looked at the monster, which was very close to him. He stood up again and thought that he had no strength left to move. Even walking a few meters already sounded like an impossible mission for him. The monster let out a very loud and prolonged scream. Tuya was surprised by this and loudly asked, "What kind of howl is that?" Kotone loudly called his name and said that if he does not leave now, he will kill him. She asks him to leave her and leave now. He didn't answer her and continued to stand in place, holding the pipe in front of him. She was worried about him, and with tears in her eyes, she wondered why he was willing to risk himself for her. After all, she hadn't done anything for him. She remembered how she had seen him being beaten before, and thought that this time she would show courage by repaying him for everything he had done. She came out from behind the tree and was about to say something, but Saito grabbed her shoulder and called her name loudly. He asked what was wrong with her. She was confused because of this and asked what he was talking about. He slammed his hand on the tree behind her back and asked with a frightening look, who gave her the right to interfere? What would happen if she got hurt? All she needed to remember once and for all was to just listen to what he said and do what he said. She understood that, right? She agreed, and at present she thought that she didn't even have the courage to disobey him. All she did was watch him get hurt. The monster ran towards him and started growling loudly before attacking. He didn't have time to strike with the club because Kotone bit his ear. Because of this, the monster started swinging the club and growling angrily. MC was surprised by what happened and thought, did he start swinging his weapon mindlessly? He decided that this was his chance, ran to attack, and their weapons clashed. He was thrown back by this attack. He flew and smiled because of what happened. The monster, with an evil look, threw her back and ran towards him. She sat up after that, called out to him loudly and said that he should run from here. He lay on the floor and said that she shouldn't worry. Everything will be okay now. The monster swung the club to attack him, and he said with a smile that the rest is up to him. Tuya came out from behind cover and loudly agreed with him. He said with a smile that with such a field of view and distance, he definitely won't miss. He fired a bow arrow with a syringe on the end and hit the monster's eye right 10 minutes before the events began. Rikuto handed him the syringe and said that they would use it. He was a little surprised by what he saw and asked, "Sakura gave them the syringe, right?" He agreed and with a serious expression said that anhydrous ethanol, used in chemistry lessons, is, in simple terms, 100% alcohol. He thought about it and asked why she had something like that with her in the first place. He said that all they needed to do was tie this syringe to an arrow and hit the monster. This should work, because alcohol is essentially poison. Few animals would even want to touch it. For example, he would take tequila with 40 degrees. If he injected this into a vein, the person would immediately pass out. He must imagine what would happen to the monster if they injected 100% alcohol into its body. He thought about it and said that the plan sounded good on paper, but in reality, even a child would understand that such a thin needle couldn't pierce the monster's skin. The protagonist said that therefore the only place he needed to aim was the eyes. If he hit the eye precisely, then they should succeed. He asked in a confused voice, but where is the guarantee that the eyes are a monster's weak spot? He looked at the fire extinguisher he was holding in his hand and said that he shouldn't worry. He would test that himself with this. He would sneak into the monster's lair and spray the extinguisher. If he can't find him and is disoriented, they will follow this plan to the end. It's a simple strategy, right? He will lead him to the right position, and he is obliged to deal him the decisive blow. Currently, Tuya called his name with a smile and said that he was still crazy. He remembered what happened earlier and thought that he sent him a signal by hitting the floor with the pipe 3 times. This means he is weak against the fire extinguisher. He said that if you put his crazy ideas aside, you can give it a solid 10 out of 10. The monster grabbed the arrow and growled angrily. MC, lying on the ground, looked at him with a smile and said that he could have said that somehow more gently. Kotone looked at what happened in surprise and said that it was incredible. Because of what happened, the monster fell on one knee and growled quietly. He looked at it with a small smile and said that it still worked. Unexpectedly for him, the monster began to roar loudly, grabbed his club and began to swing it. He slammed his weapon on the floor, but he gathered his strength and jumped back to dodge. Tuya, looking worried, loudly called his name. He thought that even though they had poisoned him, no one knew how quickly alcohol would affect him. The monster struck the wall with its weapon very hard and broke it. He looked angrily at Rikuto, who was standing in front of him, ran towards him and started growling loudly. He gathered his strength, ran towards him, grabbed him and started pushing him back. He tried to push this monster into the hole, but he didn't have enough strength to do it. He continued to try with all his might, but the monster stood firmly on its feet and swung its club to hit him. He looked at this with a worried look, but at that moment, Tuya ran towards him and loudly called his name. He ran up to them and pushed the monster along with him, causing it to lose its balance. Because of what happened, the monster began to fall down and screamed loudly, after which it hit the ground with a loud sound. He helped it not to fall and said that he barely made it in time. They climbed back and were breathing heavily from fatigue, and Kotone was glad that they both survived. She asked with a happy look if they were okay. The protagonist called him and asked if it was too reckless of him. He said with a slightly dissatisfied look that it was not for him to say that. Besides, Why was he sure that he would hit the monster? He asked with a smile that the winner of the national tournament would not hit. He found it hard to believe something like that. He was surprised by what he heard, but smiled and said that what else could you expect from a crazy person like him? After that, they approached her. Tuya cut the rope and said that she was free now. It must have been very scary, but now it's over. Can she get up? She didn't answer him. Quickly got up, hugged MC and loudly called his name. She started to cry and said that she was grateful to him for saving her life. He looked at them from the side with a little surprise and said that he could have told him the truth right away. If his beloved was in trouble, then he would also risk his life without thinking. She was surprised by what she heard and asked what he just said. He said with a smile that he was very lucky to be dating such a beautiful girl. She said that was not true. They were not in that kind of relationship. He stood next to her and asked if he could ask her something. He apologized for asking the question so directly and asked, however, who was she? They were both surprised because of this, and Tuya asked he expected anything from him, but to pretend that he did not know someone? He said with a puzzled expression that however he really did not know her. Kotone said with a small smile that it was not surprising that he did not remember her because it was quite a long time ago. She gave her name and said that they had studied together in elementary school. They used to play together a lot back then and even called each other by abbreviated names. He doesn't remember that? He repeated her name and was very surprised when he remembered her. He remembered his childhood and thought that there was something he still regretted. He was obliged to protect her and keep her safe by any means possible. Then he fought with Serato, which made him very angry, and he thought that this fight was the beginning of the end for him. After that, the accident with his parents happened, and he thought that as if that wasn't enough. He, a boy with an English face and innocent thoughts, stole everything from him and mercilessly trampled his life. Before he could notice, he had already turned into a corpse. He began to panic. He started shaking and he started screaming, which worried the others. She worriedly called him and asked loudly what happened to him. Did it hurt somewhere? He caught his breath, apologized, and said that he was fine. Tuya looked at him with a worried look and thought that clearly nothing was okay with him. He said that he remembered her. He didn't even know that they went to the same school. She apologized to him and said that it was nothing serious. She should have come and said hello to him from the very beginning. She was going to say something else, but he said that she didn't have to apologize. She did the right thing by not doing that. If she started talking to him, they would have started bullying her too. Tuya put his hand on her shoulder and said that he apologized for interrupting their conversation. However, wouldn't she like to go with them, although she may not trust them? But he didn't have time to finish because Kotone agreed to this proposal. After that, they began to inspect the school. She prayed by the bodies of the murdered students, and they also found a lizard that breathes fire. Rikuto walked forward and thought that they hadn't encountered any more monsters inside the school itself, perhaps because the Red Orc controlled this territory. However, if the leader had disappeared, there was no guarantee that a new one wouldn't appear, and they had to take that into account. After that, they lowered the fire shutters on the first floor staircase and also blocked the passage from the second to the upper floors. Afterwards, they returned to the roof to the survivors. The students were happy when they saw them and began talking loudly about it. Uyama ran up to him and, smiling, said loudly that they hadn't doubted him. Tuya looked at him with a slightly confused look and thought it would be better if he hadn't seen him at all. Saito saw her and loudly called her name. He quickly ran to her, hugged her, and said that he was very glad that she was alive. Kotone asked him to let her go and was about to say something about it. Tuya looked at this with a confused look and thought that their relationship was getting stranger and stranger. He called her and asked if she knew him. She agreed, and he happily gave his name and said that he was dating her. Sakura approached them and happily asked, "So they're a sweet couple?" She said with a confused look that it wasn't exactly like that. He laughed, called her by name, and said that there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Even their parents knew about their relationship. Although they had recently had a fight, he was glad that she was okay. He called Nishi and said that he was grateful to him for saving her. He said with a calm expression that he wasn't the one to thank. It was only thanks to his actions that she survived. Sakura was surprised by what she heard and asked, "Is he serious? It's incredible. He's cool." The other students didn't believe it and asked, "Did this weakling save anyone?" However, since he said so, they should remember how he pinned down Takeda. Is this really the same guy they all know? Saito looked at him and asked, "He's Kurogane, right?" He remembered what happened to him, laughed, and said he had no idea he was so strong and brave. He was grateful to him for saving his girlfriend. The protagonist, with a calm expression, said everything was fine. He said that, however, he didn't need to worry because she wouldn't cause him any more trouble. He would protect her. He started to lead her away and said that she must be very exhausted after everything that had happened. Kotone turned around, called out to him, and was about to say something. Sakura looked at what was happening with a confused look and said that they didn't look like a couple at all. Tuya called her and said that, by the way, the things she gave him before they left had come in very handy. She was happy to hear this and said that these monsters had an amazing body structure. Although if you look at their bodies from the perspective of structuralist biology and evolutionary theory, they don't seem so strange. Just look at their skeletal shape. the arrangement of their respiratory and circulatory tracts, and their muscle structure, which is why she thought alcohol would be effective against them. He called her again and asked, however, where did she get a syringe with alcohol? She turned away with a confused look and began to get nervous. Uyama called him and asked if he could describe in more detail everything he saw on the lower floors of the school. He agreed, after which, Tuya came up to stand in front of the students and said that their situation was not going well. The only survivor they managed to find was Tachibana and no one else. The students were worried about this, and he said that, however, they did everything to ensure the safety of the building, lowering the fire shutters to prevent new monsters from getting upstairs. After searching the entire school, they found a room with enough space for everyone. They also found food, albeit a little. It's hard to say how long it will last for everyone. The teacher said loudly that this was great news. He did an excellent job. He waved his hand and said loudly that they should all listen to him. They will split into groups and look for supplies and useful things in the school. He will explain how to behave in any given situation. They should build a new house for themselves together. The students were confused by this and quietly said that he found out that it was safe downstairs, and that's how he spoke. Thus, they moved to the new base. The students entered the classroom, where they began to look for useful things and build barricades, blocking the doors. MC took a long cloth in which he folded the bodies of the dead students and dragged them along the corridor. Kotone approached him and said that the teacher was so unfair, forcing him to deal with the corpses alone. He asked with a calm expression, however, someone has to get rid of this, right? We need to deal with the bodies before it starts to rot. She asked what he would do once he collected all the corpses. He said that burying everyone in this situation was not possible. Most likely, they would have to throw them all off the roof. He went further and said that he actually felt strange. For example, this guy was one of those who bullied him. It was not only him. Everyone in the class was making fun of him. Even the teachers ignored what was happening. It seemed to him that each of them deserved to die. It seemed that he would laugh heartily if they died at once. However, he did not find it funny. On the contrary, he felt simply disgusting. He did not think that he would ever be able to laugh heartily after everything that happened. But why? It seemed that this was heaven's punishment for wishing for death. She said that, however, she saw a hero in him. He was surprised by what he heard, turned to her, and remembered her as a child. Kotone came up to him, started putting on gloves, and said that she would help him with it. He agreed, and asked, but was she sure about this? It would be hard for a girl to do something like this. She said that everything was fine. She wanted to do it. She wanted to help them somehow. Suddenly, Saito ran out into the corridor and called him loudly. He pushed him away and, with a displeased look, asked loudly what he was doing. She became worried about this and called Rikuto. He grabbed her hand and loudly said that she didn't need to do something so disgusting. She was about to object, but he didn't listen to her and said that she should follow him. He turned around, called him a scoundrel, and said that he was trying to force a fragile girl to do his duties. No matter how disgusting this work was, dumping it on others was base. She said loudly that he should stop this because he didn't force her to do anything. She was about to say something else, but he didn't listen and said that she shouldn't worry. He understood everything perfectly. He's bossing her around because of her feelings of gratitude for saving her life, right? He understands that he acted like a hero, but this is too much. She was about to ask something, and he said that he was sorry, but he didn't leave him a choice. He would tell everyone what kind of person he was. He began to list what he wanted to tell, but she was indignant and loudly asked, "What kind of nonsense is this? He didn't deserve this." He asked her to be quiet and said that he was talking now. The protagonist didn't pay attention to this and said that he didn't care. He could do whatever he wanted. He approached the bodies and was going to continue carrying on. Saito laughed and said that all he had to do was scare him and he would immediately realize his place. He started to leave, pulled her along with him, and asked why she would get involved with this scum. She should just do what he says, and then he didn't have time to finish because Kotone couldn't stand it and hit him in the face. She cried and said that she was sorry, but she had enough. He called her with a confused look and was about to ask something. She said that their fathers were best friends. That's why she had tolerated his company all this time. His disgusting behavior towards her and others, but she had enough. He loudly called her name and asked what she was talking about. Hadn't they already decided after school? He didn't have time to finish because she said loudly that their fathers had decided so. MC apologized and asked, however, if they could continue their showdown somewhere else. They seemed to be in the way here. Saito looked at him with a displeased look and loudly said that he should shut up altogether. He turned around, loudly called her and asked why she was doing this to him. She should just think, who in this school would have protected her if not for him? Kotone, with a serious expression, asked what he just said. She got angry and said loudly that he sacrificed her to save himself. He asked loudly, what the hell is she even saying? She asked, does he think she's completely stupid? At the moment, the disaster began. She didn't finish and began to remember when they met the monsters. They were running along the corridor together, and the monsters were attacking the other students. She said loudly that they needed to go to the roof. There's usually no one there, so there shouldn't be any monsters. She thought that if they continued running aimlessly along the corridor, the monsters would eventually catch up with them. Saito was standing around the corner. Kotone didn't notice him and tripped over his foot. Because of this, she fell to the ground. He continued running, and she wondered if he had tripped her on purpose. She extended her hand to him and loudly asked him to wait for her. The monsters were running towards her and growling loudly, which really scared her. She thought with a frightened look that she didn't want to die. After that, she hid in the box and covered her mouth with her hand so as not to give away her position. At the moment, he asked loudly, what was she even talking about? When he had already gone upstairs, he saw that she was gone. He was about to say something else, and she said that maybe he was right and she really had misunderstood, because they were all so scared and did not know what to do. He loudly agreed and said that he would never do that to her. He was about to say something else, but she said loudly that however, it did not change anything. She could not trust him anymore. She asks for forgiveness, but it seems that their relationship was a mistake from the very beginning. She never loved him, and she does not think that she is even capable of such feelings for him. So she suggests that they just forget about each other and go their separate ways. Saito went to Rikuto and asked her if this was all because of him. He started laughing and said that all that is required of people is to just listen calmly and do what is wanted from them. He had been trying so hard all this time, caring about her. Kotone looked at him with a confused look and called out his name. He said in a dissatisfied voice that she was talking nonsense. He swung his fist at her and loudly asked why she couldn't just do what she was told. He continued his punch, but was surprised when he stood between them and stopped his fist. He continued to hold his hand and said that he had asked her to go somewhere else, because he was interfering with his work. He finally managed to pull his hand back and said that he had changed quite a lot. Before, he looked like a dead man who was simply following the orders of those who made fun of him. He smiled and said that he thought he understood what was going on. He must be so happy and contented, because all his bullies were dead. That's why his spirits were lifted, right? She called his name and said that he was already going too far. He said with a smile that it was logical. Now it was clear why he had become like this. He was simply disgusting. The protagonist calmly looked at him and said that he should let him clarify one point, although he could say that he was wrong. However, taking out his aggression on others doesn't make him a better person, and it turns out that he is no different from him. Saito got angry because of this, unsuccessfully tried to hit him, and loudly asked, trash like him decided to lecture him? Kotone started to worry about this and loudly asked, what is he doing? He loudly said that she should shut up because he had to get rid of this tumor. He didn't deserve to stay here. Everyone would be grateful if he disappeared. He called him and said that he wasn't as stupid as those monsters and would put him in his place in a flash. MC looked at him with a calm expression and thought, is this a karate pose? It seems he was a famous athlete in school. He calmly shook his head in refusal and said that he passed. He started laughing loudly because of this and asked, was he scared, right? As he thought, after all, he didn't let him finish because he refused and said that it wasn't about cowardice. One way or another, he was her friend. If he beat him, she would be upset, wouldn't she? Saito got even more angry because of his words and loudly called out his name. He pounced on him in a rage and told him to shove his nobility somewhere, and he easily dodged the blow. Experience in one real fight is equivalent to several years of training in the dojo. He always found these words rather dubious, but no matter how hard Saito hit him and how much pain he caused, it was nothing compared to the threat of death. In battles with monsters where lives are on the line, it is very difficult to remain calm. Fear paralyzes your body, but right now, he dodges all his attacks with such ease. Not seeing him as a threat, he kicked him, causing him to fall right onto the body bag, and when he saw the faces of the dead student, he cried out in fear. He immediately crawled away from the body, and Rikuto asked, have you decided to help him clean up? Saito picked up a broken mop and was about to attack him, but Tuya appeared in time. He called out loudly, causing them to turn around and asked what they were doing here. MC told him that everything was fine, and he said doubtfully that he saw that everything was fine. Saito stood up excitedly, and Tuya frowned, asking him and Kotone what about them. The girl answered him that nothing happened, and Saito, passing by him, confirmed this. Tuya looked after him and thought that he was smart and also good at sports. He hadn't been noticed for hooligan behavior before. He would say that he was a typical straight-A student, and he was literally obsessed with Kotone. Everything would be fine if this behavior didn't cause problems for Kotone herself. He approached them, and Rikuto asked what he was doing there, to which he replied that he just finished his business and came thinking that he needed help. He apologized to him for having to leave him to do the dirty work, but MC didn't mind at all. The others felt safe when their best marksman was standing guard. He pretended to knock an arrow and said with a smile that it was a solid 10. His friend felt uneasy and sheepishly asked him to stop. Why was he bringing this up? Looking at them, Kotone smiled and silently noted that they got along well, after which Tuya suggested that they take the bodies to the roof and then discuss everything that happened. They both agreed, and soon evening came. The students gathered in the classroom and began to get ready for bed, while the others ate. Teacher Uyama put the lunchbox on the floor and said that this would be enough for them as long as they could stay here at school. He laughed and praised himself, saying that they were lucky to have him as their leader. The girls, meanwhile, thought that this old man was so creepy and Tuya looked at the chocolate bar in his hands and said that he didn't even feel like eating. Kotone agreed with him, but Rikuto, unlike them, ate everything in sight. His friend smiled wryly and remarked that he must be hungry, to which he replied that if you completely forget about food, you can die of hunger. Someone exclaimed discontentedly from the side. Sakura tried to turn on her phone, but she was completely unable to do anything. The three decided to approach her, and Tuya asked what was wrong. Seeing the phone charger, he was slightly surprised, and she said she found it in her bag. She tried to charge the phone, but it felt like the battery had simply died completely. The boy suggested that the charger itself might be broken, but she was sure that wasn't the case. After all, she had only recently bought it, and yet it was terribly strange. Monsters literally crawled out of the phone. Why on earth could this have happened? She lay down and tiredly said that she had thought about at least browsing the internet, finding out if there was any news from other survivors. But there was no internet or working phone. Kotone asked how they could get internet access without electricity. She replied that they didn't live in a village, but in a modern city. She was sure they had a server somewhere that didn't rely on an external power source, and it should definitely work. Tuya looked at her puzzledly and said that he didn't quite understand how such a server was supposed to work under these circumstances. She decided not to explain anything further, and exclaimed with annoyance that if she had a phone that the monsters hadn't gotten out of, everything might have worked out. Then MC had an idea. He showed her his phone and said that no one had gotten out of it. It must have been broken before the disaster began. Tuya said that his phone was broken, so they definitely wouldn't need it. Sakura was lost in thought, and Kotone pulled out her phone and said with a smile that it was the same model as hers, only she didn't really use it either. Tuya glanced at their phones and noticed that this model was quite old. How long ago had they bought it? Rikuto, slightly surprised, asked how old the model was, while Sakura thoughtfully said that they could fix it. If they had the same models, then she was sure Rikuto's phone could be resurrected. Tuya realized that this really could work, and excitedly asked if she could really do it. She smiled and happily said that it seemed like a ray of hope had broken through the darkness. As soon as morning came, they gathered all the students for a talk. Tuya said that if they sat idly by, they definitely wouldn't last long. The food they managed to find would last 3 days at most. They had no contact with outsiders, and no information about what had happened. MC approached the weapons storage area and said that the self-defense tools they'd managed to find at school weren't very good. Even an iron pipe would be better. Tuya said that, in short, they were trapped here. But Sakura had found a way out of this situation. Not a single monster had emerged from Rikuto's phone, because it was already broken at the time of the disaster. But since Kotone had the same phone model, they should be able to fix it. He glanced at Sakura, asking her to confirm his words, and she, with an awkward smile, confirmed it with an uncertain look, which made everyone doubtful. MC glanced at Takeda and said that it was all thanks to him, since he was the one who broke it. He exclaimed, even if they fixed this loser's phone, then what? Tuya said they could use the internet, and with access, maybe they could learn more about what happened. They'll find the remaining survivors and find evacuation sites. Kotone asked if their goal was to use the internet. Then maybe it would be better to use a computer? Sakura said that wouldn't work and explained everything to her. Like all the other smartphones, all the computers were broken. She didn't know how that was possible, but when the monsters appeared, it didn't matter whether the devices were turned off or not. They were all caught in the crossfire. Simply put, all the devices that would have allowed them to connect to the internet were damaged. She clutched her head and exclaimed that she didn't understand the logic or common sense in this at all. Tuya pointed out that in any case, Rikuto's phone was already broken during the disaster, and perhaps, after repairing it, they'll be able to contact the outside world. They don't know. Maybe there are some lucky ones like Rikuto who managed to fix their devices with the internet. But now the main goal is to try to contact these people. MC took his weapon and said that everything has already been decided. The nearest place where they could find tools to fix a phone should be at a discount center near their school. Sakura agreed, adding that they might be able to find something there. And the students, hopeful, suggested they head there right away. They could find not only tools there, but also food, and maybe even weapons. The teacher was sternly against it, saying that as their teacher, he couldn't allow the students to do something so reckless. Rikuto asked what he was suggesting then, that they all quietly wait for their deaths? He nervously replied that of course that wasn't true. But how do they know? Maybe someone will come for them very soon? More importantly, if they go outside, they'll most likely encounter a bunch of monsters. What will they do then? MC replied that, fortunately, this place isn't that far from school, and they'll get there even faster by car. He'll give them a ride, right? Hearing this, Teacher Uyama became very nervous and excited, and Tuya remarked that this was a good idea. With a car, they would be able to avoid encounters with monsters. But the teacher became very scared and objected, justifying himself by saying that he needed to take care of the other students. He couldn't leave the school at all, and they shouldn't take such a rash step. Tuya scratched the back of his head in confusion, not at all surprised by his words. And then Kotone jumped up from her seat and declared that she would drive them there then. She knew how to drive, so she could easily take them to the store. Tuya was very surprised by her words, since she was too young to get a license, and she said that her grandfather taught her to drive when she came to his village. He taught her to drive his old truck, but she agreed that getting behind the wheel without a license was not the best idea. But since they had no choice, it was better this way. Tuya said in shock that he didn't expect her to be able to do something like that. Saito, of course, objected. He asked her to reconsider because it was too dangerous. But she didn't even let him finish and asked him to shut up. Rikuto asked if she was absolutely sure. Outside, only the unknown and many dangers awaited them. Even being in the car, there was no guarantee that he and Tuya would be able to ensure her safety. And she still wanted to do this? She confidently answered him that she understood that there was no guarantee that she wouldn't die if she went outside, just as they couldn't know that. She didn't know what the right thing to do was, but she knew for sure that she didn't want to just sit and wait for her death. And she, like them, wanted to fight for her life. MC liked her words and agreed with a smile, after which he said that they were counting on her. Saito meanwhile was angry that some loser had taken her away from him. Suddenly there was a loud bang, and the teacher lost his temper and shouted, "Do they think he'll let them do something so dangerous?" He was their teacher. His duty was to protect them. He wouldn't let them do whatever they wanted. He seemed to have gone mad while shouting, and Tuya wanted to ask what they should do then, but he didn't let him say a word and ordered him to be quiet. Little kids like them, who hadn't seen life, all they had to do was obey their elders. They had to wait. All they had to do was sit and wait. They would be safe here. They had food and water, and if they cut back on their expenses, they would have enough for another week. All they had to do was wait for help. Why take such a desperate step when they had everything here? Rikuto approached him and calmly asked why he was so sure his plan was good. The teacher was angry that he was talking to him like that, and he asked if he considered their school a safe place. Considering what their world had become, there was no room for common sense here, and there was no place left in their world that they could safely call safe. To confirm his words, a slime penetrated the classroom ceiling and attacked Tanya from behind. When he screamed loudly, everyone immediately turned to look at it. The slime swarmed around them, and he began to cry for help, and Takeda called out to him excitedly. When his friend extended his wounded hand, he backed away in fear, and while the teacher stood still, MC decided to act. He rushed toward the slime and thought that there was no room for common sense in this world, and no safe place to be found either. If they just sat idly by, they would surely meet their deaths. As soon as he approached, he jumped high and hit the monster with all his might from above, and slime sprayed out. But since the slime was very soft, he couldn't inflict any damage on it and could only retreat. The slime wanted to jump on him, but he managed to step back in time, and the monster returned to Tanya. The poor guy was groaning in pain, asking Rikuto to save him, and Rikuto, tearing the curtain off the window, told him to be patient a little longer. After that, he called out to his friend, who rushed to the slime, saying that he understood everything. MC looked at the poor Arata and thought that this slime was corroding his skin, but his clothes were still there, which meant the cloth could help. He covered the slime with the curtain, gave a signal to Tuya, and just as he pulled Tani out of the slime, Rikuto tied up the monster. Sakura excitedly asked if he managed to get it out. MC, meanwhile, threw the monster away and caught his breath, then asked how they could kill it now. In games, for example, physical attacks don't work on slimes. They can only be killed with magic. An idea occurred to him, and he turned to his friend, exclaiming that they need to set it on fire. Do they have something for that? He got nervous and said he didn't know, and then Sakura ran up to him with a canister in her hands and exclaimed that they were going to set it on fire. She poured the fuel on the slime, then threw a match and told it to die already. Immediately after that, the slime burst into a bright flame, and after a few seconds, only ashes remained. Rikuto said that he thought that fire was these slimes' weakness, and the girl excitedly said that everything happened so unexpectedly. She didn't even understand how she did it. He smiled and noted that she really helped them out, then turned to Tuya and asked how Tani was. Unfortunately, Tani died from his injuries, and now his friend Takeda was crying over him. MC just sighed, after which the teacher spread his arms out to the sides and nervously asked why they were all standing there. It was all over, after all. Unable to bear it anymore, Rikuto looked at him with a gloomy expression and asked, does he understand everything now? There is no safe place. If they stood silently, shaking with fear, they would all be devoured by this monster. And he still wants to stand his ground? They just have to wait for salvation that won't even have time to come? This is tantamount to just waiting for their death. Teacher Uyama realized that he won't out-argument him and fell exhausted to the floor, saying that they won, let them do whatever they want. After that, they set off. Tuya shot at the monsters from a distance. MC hit everyone with his pipe, protecting the girls. When they finished off the last monsters, they caught their breath and Rikuto said that there were no more monsters in the schoolyard, which means they need to run to the parking lot before anyone else comes to them. They found the teacher's car and Tuya handed Kotone the keys, after which they climbed inside. Seeing the luxurious leather interior, Tuya admiringly said that this car was so cool and asked the girl if she could handle it. She confidently answered him that everything would work out. It would even be easier here than with a car with an automatic transmission. He, shocked, noted that she was simply something, and Sakura asked if she really had to go with them. He said that only she knew what tools would be needed for repairs. After all, she would be fixing the phone. Isn't that right? She smiled nervously and agreed with him, then climbed into the car and said that she had lived such a short life. Tuya, meanwhile, glanced at the huge backpack on her back and wondered what else she kept there. After that, he looked at Saito and asked if he really wanted to go with them. He answered him that since Kotone was going, then he should too, since he had promised to protect her. As he was climbing into the car, Tuya warned him just in case that this wouldn't be the best place to sort things out, and he irritably replied that he understood everything. He wasn't as stupid as they thought he was. He wasn't planning on dying here either, so just like them, he had to fight for his life. He glanced at Kotone, who was happily discussing the route with Rikuto, and clicked his tongue in displeasure, and Toya had a feeling that taking him along was a bad idea. Once everyone was inside, Kotone said it was time to hit the road. Are they all ready? Tuya confidently confirmed this. Sakura agreed hesitantly, thinking that she didn't want to be here, but she had little choice, and Saito was dissatisfied as always. MC said that since everyone was ready, they were leaving. Their destination was the discount center. Kotone floored the gas pedal and the car shot forward, while the teacher and the other students watched from the window. The girl noticed they were gone, then turned to the teacher and said that they should burn the bodies they had loaded onto the roof as quickly as possible. Rikuto had said so. He slammed his wooden katana onto the floor in anger and ordered her to be quiet. He was furious that they were all relying only on Rikuto and not on him, and exclaimed that since he had said it, he should deal with it himself. Had they all forgotten that he was in charge here, they would only do as he said. The students were so terrified that they didn't dare object, but leaving the bodies to rot on the roof would certainly have consequences. Meanwhile, the students were already halfway to their destination. They were driving through the ruined streets of the city, where monsters, not people, now roamed. They were finishing off the bodies when they saw the car barreling toward them, growling menacingly. Kotone drove straight into them without a doubt, knocking them down, and MC remarked that she had done a great job. She nervously told him that she was glad to help, while Tuya peered out of the sunroof and said that it had been the right decision to go by car after all. Small monsters were no problem, but what would they do with such big guys? He glanced at the huge cyclops further down the road and said that driving forward was not an option. They needed to find a way around. Sakura pulled out a map and said that then they should return to the intersection and turn right. Rikuto told Kotone that they were counting on her, to which she smiled sheepishly, and Saito clearly didn't like it. Several winged creatures perched on the pillars growled, and the wolves below followed their example and continued eating. Looking at all this, Toya remarked that they had witnessed the end of the world. MC asked if there was anyone else alive nearby, and he replied that there wasn't a soul on the streets. He said he was sure there were still people out there who had been lucky enough to survive like them, and he noted that usually in a situation like this, people would hide somewhere. Sakura said that they weren't exactly normal, driving around in such a situation. Saito asked Kotone to stop the car, and she immediately slowed down, then asked if something was wrong. Tuya was worried and asked if he had noticed something. He pointed forward and said that if they drove about 50 meters here, they would reach a shop. They could get food there. They should go for supplies, don't they? Sakura agreed with him, and Rikuto said that they could go for food another time. Now they had a different goal. Saito said with displeasure that he hadn't even asked him. Or did he think it was dangerous there? Or maybe he just didn't want to take his opinion into account? Saito started sorting things out again and said that Rikuto was only good at fighting monsters. Such a leader would be of no use to them. When will they finally understand this? Tuya told him to stop. Rikuto wanted to express his opinion, but he didn't even let him say a word. Sakura agreed with him and said that now was not the time to quarrel. Kotone was of the same opinion and called out to Saito in confusion, to which he only snorted and again stared out the window with displeasure. Now Tuya was also wondering what they should do. They weren't entirely sure whether they would get food at their destination. Maybe there would even be a huge monster there. Would it be right to go out for food now, but at a high risk of encountering monsters? Noticing his doubts, MC said that in this situation, there was no truly correct decision. Also, even though he managed to defend the right to enter the city, it was still unclear whether their decision was entirely correct. But since they were here, he wanted to do everything in his power. So let them do what they thought was right. He would support any of their initiatives if they thought it was right. His friend was slightly surprised by his words and smiled, after which he declared that then they would first go to the shop. Food is also important to them all, and if it's nearby, they can take the opportunity to get more supplies for the others. They agree, right? Everyone nodded in agreement, and 5 minutes later, they arrived at the same shop. The boys got out of the car and looked at the building, then told the girls they were leaving. Sakura waved goodbye and asked them to be careful, and Tuya said that if they sensed danger, to come back immediately. When they entered the shop, they found it completely empty. Tuya noted that the situation was quite dire, and Rikuto quickly looked around and said that there were no monsters nearby. His friend sat down next to the shelves and said that there was no bread or onigiri here. Everything was empty. MC assumed that the survivors took the food, or maybe the monsters just ate it all, but the canned food was intact. He took 2 cans, and Tuya happily said that they could have them. They need to look around here some more. Maybe they'll find something else. 15 minutes passed. They looked at the bags filled with food. Apparently they'd collected everything they could here. Saito heard some sounds. He turned around and told the others that there was someone in the back room. Tuya didn't stand on ceremony and immediately threw open the door, loudly asking if anyone was there. But inside it was empty, only a cardboard box with bread lying on the floor. But it looked very suspicious. Saito noticed that the box was full of bread and was very happy, saying that they were very lucky. He wanted to take it, but Rikuto asked him to wait. He turned to him irritably and asked if he had something against the fact that he found something useful. He asked in response, doesn't he find it strange? If there is food in this box, then why are there strange bloodstains on the floor right next to it? What happened here? Saito asked displeasedly. What is he hinting at? He pointed to the floor and said that he had no idea what was wrong with the box, but he should at least look at his feet. Someone had left a message. There was "Danger, keep out" written on the floor and an arrow pointing to the box. He said that he had a bad feeling about this, so he thought they shouldn't go in there. But Saito, of course, due to his hatred for Rikuto, didn't take his words seriously and let out a laugh, asking, is that all his arguments? Is he convincing him to leave, and then he will secretly take everything and pose as the breadwinner? He sees right through him. He took the box and proudly declared that it was his loot, but he didn't expect that this bread wasn't bread at all. A shapeless mass appeared in the box and a huge eye was looking straight at him, and then the monster pounced on him and he screamed loudly in fear. The girls in the car heard this and became worried. And Sakura, noticing something off to the side, grabbed Kotone by the head and told her to duck. There were lizardmen nearby. They must have heard the noise and come here. Kotone, meanwhile, was worried about Rikuto. Meanwhile, a mimic pounced on Saito, and MC ran to his aid. He swung, then hit the monster with all his might, throwing it aside, and as soon as it was on the ground, he began to beat it. After finishing, he caught his breath and said that it must be a mimic, a monster pretending to be treasure. The game monsters seemed to have taken over their reality. Meanwhile, Tuya stood guard. He peeked out from the shop and warned Rikuto of the danger. They carefully exited the utility room and saw the lizardmen. MC said that they must have been attracted by the noise from the shop. His friend noted that there were too many of them, but it seems they haven't noticed them yet. What will they do? He said that they need to somehow get around them. They definitely can't defeat 5 monsters. Tuya agreed with him and said that they also need to find out how the girls are doing in the car. Meanwhile, one of the lizardmen was wandering near the car, and the girls sat quietly and didn't move. But when the monster pierced the glass with its spear, they screamed loudly in fear, and the boys heard it. Tuya immediately realized that they had been noticed and asked Rikuto what they should do now, and he exclaimed that there was no choice. They would have to attack. He called out to the boys, but Saito was so scared that he was shaking with fear, not daring to come out. Realizing that he was incapable of doing anything at all, Tuya said that this meant they would fight the old-fashioned way. Meanwhile, the lizardmen pulled the girls out of the car and threw them to the ground to finish them off. One of them was about to pierce them with a spear, but an arrow pierced his neck, and he fell to the ground. His comrades were perplexed, and then MC appeared. He ran out of the shop with a loud scream and pounced on the monster, hitting it on the head with a pipe, which caused a ringing sound, after which he called out to Kotone and asked her to take care of Sakura. They would distract them and let them run. Meanwhile, he found himself surrounded by 3 at once, and his friend was hiding behind the shop. Peeking out from his hiding place, he fired an arrow at one of them, but it easily dodged, and he thought that the situation was very bad. Because they know about him, they easily dodge arrows, so he won't be able to cover Rikuto. Meanwhile, he thought that it was obvious that they couldn't handle a large group of monsters. Was he really going to die here? But he wasn't going to give up so easily. The moment one of the monsters attacked him, he blocked its attack, and at that very moment, another one pounced on him from behind. He turned around in horror, and a thought flashed through his mind that he didn't want to die. And suddenly, a stone flew at the lizardman's head. All 3 stared at him in surprise, and then a cheerful voice of a boy named Tuta was heard from the roof of the building, exclaiming that one was incapacitated. Judging by his clothes, he was from their school, so it turned out that he was the one who threw the stone at him. He took a few more stones and prepared himself, then threw them at the lizardmen, and they became agitated, trying to dodge. For Tuya, it was the perfect moment. He shot at the monster, killing it instantly, and another boy from their school, Takeshi, ran up behind the third one and hit him with brass knuckles with all his might in the face. After landing a few more blows, he managed to kill it, and the last monster remained. MC pounced on him, thinking that he didn't know who they were or where they were from, but this was their chance. He hit him over the head with a pipe as hard as he could, and once the monsters were dealt with, he allowed himself to rest. He turned to the boys and thanked them with a smile for their help. The girls approached them, and Sakura happily waved her hands, saying that they had finally met someone alive. Tuya noticed their uniforms and noted that they were from their school. He then said that they had something to talk about, but it was too dangerous to stay here, so they needed to leave. Tuta was delighted and offered to come with them. They knew a safe place. He looked at his friend and asked, "He doesn't mind, does he?" He nodded in response, and Tuya laughed nervously, saying that he already thought they were finished. Rikuto agreed, noting that luck was on their side. After that, Kotone headed to the car and told everyone to get in. Tuta was very surprised to see they had transportation. They set off, and after 10 minutes, they decided to introduce themselves. Tuta said he was a first-year student. His name was Issei Tuta. Then he pointed to his friend and said he was a 3rd year. Yamaoka Takeshi. He leaned forward and said their safe spot was right ahead. It turned out to be a huge love hotel. The girls looked at it, blushing, and the MC remarked that it was a great place. During the day, there were almost no people in such places, which meant there were minimal phones. Tuta agreed with him, and Tuya looked at him doubtfully, saying that it was logical, but he was probably wondering how they got there, and Tuta, realizing what he was thinking, slapped his friend on the back and excitedly said that they weren't on that kind of relationship at all. He waved his hand, saying that he had already guessed, and then offered to share information with them. But Saito wasn't thrilled with the idea. He stepped aside and told them to do whatever they wanted, which made Tuta feel awkward, and Tuya told them to ignore him. He'd been acting like this ever since they set out. Saito, meanwhile, was simply burning with rage at Rikuto. After that, it was time for a discussion, and Tuta said that even though they were sharing information now, there wasn't much to tell him. He was walking home after school when monsters started coming out of his phone. He's not particularly strong, so he decided to just run away, but he ended up being surrounded, and when he thought there was no hope, Takeshi appeared out of nowhere and saved him. He's very strong, and it was he who found them shelter. If it weren't for him, he would have died long ago. It turns out that Tuya knew Takeshi. He'd heard about him, but in a bad way. Compared to Takeda's friends, he's a real scumbag. He's been in fights, involved in all sorts of shady and criminal activities, and he's also connected to the Yakuza, and they say he's already killed someone before. However, given how he helped Tuta, maybe it's all just empty gossip. At least, that's what he wants to believe. Takeshi said that monsters came out of the phones, chaos started happening on the street, and before it was too late, he went to get food and met him on the way. MC said he had one question for them. Weren't they the ones who left the sign in the shop's warehouse? Judging by their confused expressions, it definitely wasn't them, and he told them to just forget about it, after which Tuta asked them to tell him everything that happened to them. The conversation was long. They moved to one of the rooms in the hotel, and when Tuya finished his story, Tuta said in surprise that he didn't even know there was a whole group of survivors at the school. They were lucky, so if they fix the phone, they can call for help. Tuya answered him that there was a chance, albeit a small one, and then Tuya asked what the two of them were going to do next. They wouldn't force them, they could just head to the school. His tone made Sakura feel like he was forcing them anyway. The two of them started thinking about it, after which Takeshi declared that he would go with them, which surprised his friend, who said that he didn't see a problem with that, and besides, their strength could be useful. Tuya replied that if he really went with them, he would be a great help, after which Takeshi looked at his friend and asked his opinion on the matter. If he didn't want to, he could go to school. He excitedly exclaimed in response that, since he was going with them, he would go too. He was a man after all. Rikuto smiled and said that this was an unexpected result, but he was still glad that they stopped at the shop. Tuya agreed with him, and while they were rejoicing, Takeshi said that their idea was reckless. There were a lot of residential buildings on the way to the store, which meant a lot of monsters. One wrong step and everyone would die, so they needed to choose the safest possible route. This is the rule of any strategy. Consider all possible risks and choose the safest path. Sakura admired his words, and Tuya noted that he was right. They were too naive and didn't even think about the possible risks. MC agreed with him and said that before setting off, they needed to plan their next steps. Takeshi volunteered to plot the route, as he had previously been interested in military strategy, and no one objected. They enthusiastically set about devising a plan, and Saito, as always, stood aside. Only after they had thought everything through did they set out on a journey to determine the safest route. There were, of course, a couple of dangerous moments, but with their combined efforts, they forged ahead. Several days passed, but they already had a completed map with a safe route. They finally arrived where they were originally going, only the journey took longer than they expected. But the main thing was that no one was hurt. The girls looked with relief at the discount center in front of them, and Takeshi told his friend that he was shaking all over. He knew he should have gone to school. He responded excitedly, saying that he wasn't shaking at all. It was just that his heart was beating so hard from courage. Saito, as always, was perpetually dissatisfied and remained on the sidelines. And as they all headed together to the discount center, Rikuto told everyone to be on guard. The real tests lay ahead. His friend agreed with him and said that they needed to succeed. It wasn't for nothing that they had come all this way. Meanwhile, many harpies flocked to the school, drawn by the smell of meat, and the students were already starting to go hungry. Every day they received half a loaf of bread, and it was clearly not enough. One of the students clutched his head, wondering how long this existence would continue, and one of the girls said she wondered how Sakura was doing. Her friend, upset, said that she hadn't heard from them since then. Were they really dead already? Another girl, Enomoto, clutched her stomach, which ached from hunger, and approached the teacher, who was eating 2 loaves of bread at once, asking him to give them some food, as they were not feeling full. He reacted rather harshly to her request, slamming his weapon on the floor and shouting that they didn't understand anything at all. that they needed to conserve food now, and there was little left. If they didn't understand anything, then they should sit silently. Takeda hissed through clenched teeth that he was eating enough for 2, while they were content with crumbs. Enomoto said that at this rate they wouldn't last until their return, and the teacher grinned and said that if they still didn't understand everything in their empty heads, he would explain everything to them now. They had long since become food for monsters. She became agitated and asked him not to say such things, since they had left for all of them. The man came very close to her, which startled her, and putting his arm around her waist, said that since she was so hungry, she should show him how much she wanted it. If she did, he would think about her request. Realizing what he was hinting at, she immediately broke free from his arms and took a few steps back, indignantly exclaiming, "What nonsense is he talking about?" He spread his arms wide and said he was just joking, and the boys were already beside themselves with rage. Hunger and anger reached their peak within the school walls, while Rikuto and his group entered the building. Tuya looked around and noticed that there were no monsters in sight, and glanced at Rikuto. They both knew what this meant. Most likely, the main boss of this location resided here. As a result of their reconnaissance, they discovered that there were many varieties of monsters, but among each type, there is an especially strong one, and when such an one appears, the number of the other, weaker ones decreases significantly. They called these monsters the main bosses of the location, based on gaming slang. Tuya thoughtfully asked why all the local monsters looked like they were from games, although that made it much easier for them to categorize them. MC agreed with him and said that he had noticed the similarity too. In any case, it wasn't that important, they just needed to move on. Sometime later, they reached the floor where parts, tools, and various chemicals were sold. Sakura was especially happy, as she could fill her bag with something new, and ran to empty all the shelves in a row. They decided to split up. Kotone and Tuta would go help Sakura in her search, and Tuya and Saito would keep an eye on the others. Rikuto and Takeshi would look around for enemies. Everyone went about their assigned tasks, and Sakura was very delighted. She picked up a part from the shelf and admiringly said that she never even imagined something like this would be here. She took a piece of paper and started writing something down, and Kotone asked what she was doing. Was she writing out a plan? She replied that she was writing down everything that needed to be done to fix the phone's processor. By the way, she definitely liked the smell of a soldering iron. She only smiled awkwardly in response, and Tuta thought that Sakura wasn't the person he imagined. Meanwhile, Tuya glanced at the girl and noticed that she was true to herself, but Saito responded to his words with an irritated sigh. As always, MC wandered nearby, noticing that it was somehow suspiciously quiet, and then his eye caught a note on the drink machine. It was written there, "They eliminate intruders. You need to get rid of E," on top of their heads. He had no idea what it meant and took it, wondering if this hint could have been left by the same person who left the warning at the shop. Heavy footsteps were heard from the side, and a huge golem emerged from around the corner and announced that 2 heat sources had been detected. Rikuto stood in front of it and wondered if it was a talking earthen doll. "I think they're called golems." The monster mistook them for intruders and decided to destroy them, then pounced on Rikuto. He reacted in time and jumped aside, and the drink machine was damaged instead. He noticed that this monster was fast and also strong, and rushed into battle, hitting it on the head, but nothing worked. Since it was too strong, he couldn't handle it with a simple pipe. He dodged the blow, and when he saw that his fist was approaching him, he fearfully thought that if he hit it, all his bones would break. Takeshi arrived in time to help him. He hit the golem's core with all his might, splitting it, and the monster fell. MC was very happy about his arrival, but this was not enough to finally kill it. The golem rose to its feet, and Takeshi noticed that he had broken its core, but he didn't care. Rikuto prepared for battle and said that no opponent is omnipotent. He must have weaknesses too. They just need to find them. The guy agreed with him and, flexing his fists, said that the numbers were already in their favor. He was counting on him. After that, the golem furiously attacked him, but he was so agile that he was able to quickly dodge and even strike back. The monster staggered from the punches, and Rikuto mentally noted that he was strong. Could he really be a boxer? Maybe he was not a professional, but he had rarely met such strong people. But they were literally fighting against stone, so all his attacks were useless now. At that moment, Takeshi struck again, but at the last moment noticed that the golem was actually not idle either. He managed to dodge the main blow, but his cheek was wounded. After that, he jumped to the side, and MC thought that if this continued, they would definitely not be able to defeat him. What should they do? He remembered the note on the drink machine. You need to get rid of E on top of their heads. He noticed that the golem indeed had the letter E on its head, realizing that it was its weak spot. He asked the guy to step aside, then prepared himself and rushed forward, thinking that he needed to hit it on the head. Seeing the inscription on the monster's head, he hit it with a pipe with all his might and broke off the letter E, causing the monster to immediately fall apart. Teishi was very surprised. He didn't understand how he did it, and the others immediately came running to the noise to check if everything was okay. Seeing a pile of dirt next to them, Tuya was surprised, and Rikuto told him that they were attacked by a golem. His friend asked in surprise, "So did that mean they just defeated it?" He confirmed it, and said that he remembered a story about a golem. The golem moves only thanks to the word on its head, emeth, truth. But if you remove the first letter, you get meth, death. Thus, the word takes on a completely different meaning. Tuya scratched his head in confusion and said that he had a feeling that their world was becoming more and more like a fantasy. Tuta didn't understand anything, but still let out an admiring sigh, and Saito, as always, mockingly asked, "So it was a simple enemy? Then they don't deserve praise." Takeshi didn't let him finish and said that was not true at all, after which he turned to MC and said that he saw everything. How he focused his gaze on his movements and aimed for a precise blow to the head. His speed and visual acuity are truly amazing. Now he knows for sure that he can cover him. Rikuto smiled in response and said he was only glad, and Tuta was delighted and exclaimed that he was so lucky, but Takeshi had never praised him yet. Saito, as always, clicked his tongue in displeasure, showing with his whole appearance that he didn't like all of this and how annoying everyone was. And Tuya said that in any case, it looked like they had managed to defeat the main boss of this location. Now they could calmly continue exploring. He noticed that his friend was standing with a thoughtful expression on his face and asked what was wrong. He replied that this golem was somehow weak for the main boss of the location, and at that very moment a noise was heard from the side, like something heavy rolling on the floor. Hearing this, Tuya froze in place and noted that the sound was coming from the upper floor. Sakura smiled nervously and said that all this did not bode well. Had they really relaxed for nothing? At that moment, a huge ball flew from the second floor, and Tuya exclaimed in surprise, "Is that a boulder?" Sakura screamed in fear and asked where a boulder would come from in the store. MC immediately ran to Kotone. He grabbed her and jumped to the side with her, and the huge ball rolled nearby and hit the wall. A second later, a huge eye appeared on the ball, after which it began to take the form of a golem. Seeing the huge monster in front of them, they all became very nervous, and Rikuto said that it looked like the main boss of the location. His friend laughed nervously, and the golem said that the intruders had been detected. He raised his fist above his head and then slammed it with all his might. Fortunately, everyone was able to jump aside in time. They all huddled again, and MC, looking at the monster's head, thought that simply hitting it would be a waste of time, but the inscription was too far away. They wouldn't be able to reach it. Understanding what he was thinking, Tuya said that he would figure it out. He just needs to erase the letters from his head, right? After that, he took aim and fired his bow, but the arrow simply broke on the stone head, leaving no scratches. He clenched his teeth in frustration, and Sakura asked worriedly, what should they do now? The golem spread its arms out to the sides. It was simply furious. Crystals grew from its back, and its eye began to glow, as if it were accumulating energy. Sakura smiled nervously and said that she didn't like it, and Tuya excitedly exclaimed that they needed to hide quickly. He was about to explode. MC ordered everyone to run, and Tuya took Sakura and ran away with her, while the others ran in the other direction. Kotone worriedly called out to Rikuto, and at that moment the golem fired a laser at them, and there was a roar. The laser hit the floor and burned a hole to the floor below. Rikuto helped drag the wounded Tuya to safety and said that this freak wasn't so easy to hit. Kotone asked with a worried look what happened to him. He said that he was unconscious and would hardly be able to fight. She asked with a worried look, then what about everyone else? He said that he didn't know where they were. Now they needed to think about what they could do. They needed to go back to the underground parking. It seemed the others were heading there too. Saito asked loudly, is he a complete idiot? The entrance to the underground parking is behind this monster. How will they get to the door if they have ballast in the form of this archer? She was indignant at what he said, but to their surprise, he said that in fact, he was right. The only logical solution in this situation would be to leave him here and run to the stairs themselves. However, he wouldn't do that even under threat of death. Unexpectedly, the monster fired its laser again with a very loud sound. They peeked out from behind cover and Saito asked what was wrong with it. The protagonist looked at it and said that he tried to attack the ground, which was burning. After that, he went out alone and stood in front of the monster. He started to run away, leading the monster with him, and looked away. Kotone saw this, called Saito, and said that they should run. He took Tuya on his shoulders, ran too, and agreed with her. He continued to run from the monster and thought that from what they knew about golems, they don't like fire. Also, the golem they met earlier said that 2 heat sources were detected. Simply put, they attack targets that emit heat. So they came up with a plan. While he distracted the golem, the rest ran to the stairs. When they reached there, Tachibana would throw the flare he gave her. If this big guy is distracted even for a moment, then he too can escape. However, if he turns his attention to the others, then it will be over. He must delay him by any means necessary. Kotone and the others successfully reached the stairs and she called his name. He was happy about this, called her loudly and said that she must act. She agreed, swung and was about to throw it. Unexpectedly for her, Saito grabbed her hand, snatched the flare, and threw it onto the stairs. She was indignant about this and loudly asked what he did. He loudly said that he had no other choice. What if she hadn't thrown it? This big guy would have turned on them. She turned around with a worried look and loudly called MC, who was standing in front of the monster. The golem delivered a strong punch with its hand and threw him aside. He flew several meters and hit his back against the wall. She was very worried about this, called him loudly, and he said that she can't come near. They should leave him. The main thing is they should take care of Tuya. He loudly called Saito and said that if he wanted to get rid of him like this, so be it, but he must protect them both. He said with a smile that she saw, he told them to leave. She got very angry at him and hit him hard in the face with her fist. He fell to the ground because of this, and she ran to him and loudly called his name. He was very hurt because of the golem's attack, sat on the floor and asked. He knew that this day would come, but for everything to end like this, he remembered how Serato said that no matter how hard he tried, he would remain dead until the end of days. Rikuto thought that maybe he was right about something after all. The golem started to attack him with a laser, but at the last moment, Kotone managed to grab him and jump to the side. He was very surprised by this and called out to her loudly. He sat up and asked with a surprised expression why she did this. She grabbed him by the collar and asked loudly if he intended to part with his life so easily. She knew him, and he had never been that kind of person. He remembered his childhood with a surprised expression and thought that indeed, the past him had fought to the end ever since. Currently, he stood up, took his pipe, and thought that it was because he had always wanted to live. At that moment, Tuya fired his bow, but was unable to erase the letter from the monster's head. It turned and looked at the group of students standing on the stairs. He apologized with a serious expression and said that he had been knocked out for a couple of minutes. They were both glad when they saw that they were all safe. Tuta said with a smile that they were also thinking about how to get to the stairs. They had really helped them out. Takeshi, with a calm expression, said that he apologized for keeping them waiting. Tuya began to take out an arrow, loudly called the protagonist and asked, so they should sort this out, right? He agreed, then called Kotone and said that the golem was coming here, she should hide. She agreed and started to run, and he dodged the monster's attack. He watched this from afar and asked, what on earth were they getting into? Honestly, he had the urge to run away as quickly as possible. Takeshi said that, however, it was too late. There was a knock on the door leading to the stairs from the other side. Saito was very scared because of this and loudly asked, what were those sounds behind the door? He turned around and asked, so they had already arrived? Small golems were hiding on the lower floors. They would have dealt with them, however. Sakura was very surprised by what happened and loudly asked, so they were surrounded? Tuya loudly called out to MC and asked what they should do. If they just stood there, they would be killed instantly. He called out to him loudly and said that he would distract the monster. His task was to hit the letter. He could spare no arrows and try as much as he could. In response, he loudly said that it was useless. They had already tried and failed. He said with a serious expression that, however, they had no choice. As long as they were alive, they needed to keep fighting. Sakura latched onto the word alive and loudly called out to Kurogane and Nishi. She said in an uncertain voice that she had an idea, but she needed them to buy her some time. She knew that she wasn't particularly reliable, but she didn't have time to finish because he loudly said that he trusted him and would buy as much time as it took. She was touched by this and said that, however, she was the one who dragged them here. She didn't have time to finish because he said that, of course, he believed her, because she had never let them down yet. Rikuto called out loudly to Tuya, who agreed and said that they would distract the monster and she should hurry. It was desirable that she make it before they were killed. Tuta called her and asked if she had a plan. She plucked up her resolve and said that since they believed in her, she would definitely succeed. Takeshi ran to the monster and with a serious expression said that he would go too and that he should keep an eye on the girls. After that, Sakura collected many flasks with different substances and laid them out on the floor. Kotone noticed that she was trembling from worry and asked if she was okay. She agreed in a frightened voice and asked if she could please not get in her way. The golem struck with his hand and the protagonist managed to jump back. Tuta turned around with a worried look, called her, and said that he was asking her to hurry. She was very worried about what was happening and said loudly that she knew it herself. It would be better for them to remain silent. This experiment should be done in the lab and not shake the reagents. By doing it here, she was condemning herself to death. She remembered that he believed in her, laughed nervously, and said that only a drop remained to be added and everything was ready. She was glad about this and said that this flask cannot be shaken, otherwise they will all blow up. Now they need to send this flask directly to the head of this monster. Kotone asked with a puzzled look, however, how they were going to do this. Sakura was very confused by this and loudly said how stupid she was. She began to prepare the reagents, but did not think at all about how to hit him. Suddenly, Tuta snatched the flask from her and asked, "You need to hit the head, right? He can handle this." It wasn't for nothing that he went to the baseball club. She, looking very frightened, loudly called him an idiot and said that he can't shake it. The others were already quite tired while they were holding back this huge monster. Tuya, looking very tired, looked at this golem and called it a freak. It raised its head and began to concentrate a powerful beam in its core, which immediately attracted their attention. He ran to them, loudly called them, and said that he apologized for taking so long. He swung to throw the flask and loudly said that Senpai had prepared this solution and it should help them. The monster stopped its laser attack because it noticed the flask flying at it. Kotone, looking confused, called her and asked what she had prepared. Sakura, looking confused, said that she had conducted a very simple scientific experiment. She mixed glycerin with nitric and sulfuric acids and ended up with nitroglycerin. She was about to say something else, but at that very moment, there was a powerful explosion that destroyed the monster's head. Everyone was incredibly shocked by what happened and tried to comprehend it for a few seconds. Only the lower half of the golem remained, and Tuya asked what just happened. Tuta turned around with a very scared look and asked why it exploded. Sakura, with a confused look, said that it was just nitroglycerin that is usually used to make dynamite. Maybe that's why this happened to the golem. He became even more scared because of this and asked loudly, "Couldn't they have said this earlier?" Tuya looked at what happened to the golem and said that the explosion was a rather unexpected decision. He didn't even have time to realize what happened. He called her and said that they won, of course, but this, she said with a guilty look that she would try to resort to something like this only in emergency cases. MC silently walked to the stairs and he looked at him and noticed it. He ran up to him, called out, and asked where he was going. He was about to say something else, but looked at the stairs and asked, "Did the small golems turn to dust?" He calmly said that after the explosion, he stopped hearing them hitting the door, so he decided to check. He asked with surprise, that is, they collapsed after the death of the large golem? He looked at it and said that he himself did not feel logic, but it was not that important. He went back, called Sakura, and asked, but what was important was, did she find all the missing parts to fix the phone? She agreed and said that she had everything with her. He said that he was also grateful for saving them all. She was embarrassed by this and said that there was nothing wrong with it. Tuya said that it was not safe to stay here. They should run away before he could finish, because Kotone hit Saito in the face and said that he was just a terrible person. He asked loudly with a confused look, how could she say such a thing? He did everything to protect her. She turned away from him and said that she didn't even want to know him anymore, and he wasn't allowed to come near her anymore. Tuya looked at this with a puzzled expression and asked what had happened between them. Suddenly, he ran past and shouted loudly with a confused look. He became worried about this, called out to him loudly, and asked where he was running. There could still be monsters left in the building. Could he even hear him? Saito didn't answer this, locked himself in a dark room, and asked why this was happening to him. She had always belonged only to him. He remembered Rikuto and said that it was all because of him. That freak had to die. He kicked the boxes and asked loudly why he didn't just die. His attention was drawn to a coffin, into the lid of which a knife with a note was stuck, and he asked, "What the hell is that? What is a coffin doing here?" He pulled out the knife, took the launcher, on which it was written that it was sealed, "Do not touch." Because of this, the coffin lid began to open, and he asked, "What does this all mean?" He was very scared when he saw a skeleton that looked at him. Tuya was walking down the corridor, looking for him, and said that they would have left here a long time ago if he hadn't run away. He called his name again and asked where he was. Saito came out to them, happily asked for forgiveness, and said that here he was. He turned to him and asked where he had even been. After all, he told him this clearly and distinctly. It is dangerous to be here alone, because monsters are everywhere. He apologized again and said that he was so upset and ashamed of his behavior. By the way, they took everything. Why did they come? Maybe it's time to run away from here? He agreed, but looked at him with a puzzled look and said that he was too pleased. Takeshi looked at him warily and thought that maybe he was just imagining things. But for some reason, he acutely felt the presence of something ominous behind his back. After some time, they arrived at the hotel and Tuya said that here they were. Sakura said that at first, she didn't really want to go there, but now it feels just like home. They went inside, she managed to fix the phone, and he asked loudly in surprise, she was seriously able to connect to the network? She went into the browser and said that she was right. The internet is working. Tuta joyfully called her and said that it was incredible. She said with a smile that it wasn't as difficult as it seemed. The protagonist called her and asked if there were any messages from survivors, or maybe information about evacuation. She said that he should wait a little. She was already looking into everything. So after that very day of the end, no more messages were published online. Although in the X-prefecture, in the city of Amashima, it seems all the survivors have gathered. He said with a smile that it is quite far, but the main thing is that there is still someone there. Tuya agreed with a smile and said that it is better to go there than to wait for death at school. Kotone said that they finally had a ray of hope. They did it. He agreed and said that now they have a goal. Saito, with a sly smile, listened to this, standing nearby and laughing because of what he heard. Tuya said that so, tomorrow they will head to school and inform everyone about what they found out. She said that no matter how terrible their world is now, they will be able to find a corner of safety. At the same time, at school, Enomoto loudly begged him not to do this. Uyama thrust a knife next to her head and asked how much longer she will resist. She is just wasting her strength. She asked him to come to his senses, and he said that her curves are simply amazing. He seemed to have ascended to heaven. Sometime later, While Rikuto and the others were returning from a mission, 2 students began to rebel against the teacher and loudly said that they had enough. He was planning to starve them, right? The other students looked at what was happening with a worried look and asked what they should do. One of the students said loudly that he should give them food right now. He looked at them with a displeased look and said that he had told them that there was no food. The second student did not believe him and loudly said that he was sure that he had hidden it somewhere. They had enough. He had to say what he knew. Otherwise, he did not have time to finish because Uyama, with a very displeased look, said that they should both shut up. He did not intend to tolerate their selfish behavior. He was a teacher, and his words were absolute. Their job as students was to obey him unquestioningly. Takeda asked with a displeased look, "Does he take them for stupid and obedient cattle?" He loudly insulted him and punched him in the face. The teacher fell to the floor, and he said that now he must give up the key to the storeroom. They were sure that he had it. He noticed that the teacher began to get up, called him stubborn and asked, "Is he getting up again?" He swung his arm to kick him and loudly said that he should finally fall down. The students were very surprised when Uyama with an evil smile stabbed him with a knife. The students were very surprised by this and asked, "Did he really kill him?" He walked towards the student with a bat and said that he had warned them about listening to teachers. Otherwise, he would have to take disciplinary measures against them. He looked with a frightened look as he swung the knife and loudly asked him to stop. After some time, he walked down the corridor, carrying Enomoto on his shoulder and laughing. He entered the office and loudly said that he was back. He looked at the frightened students sitting next to each other and asked why they were all huddled in the corner. He threw her on the floor, and the students became even more frightened because of this, as expected from a member of the track and field club. She has a great and toned body. She started crawling on the floor with a very frightened look and was trembling with terror. He approached the students and said that he decided that Kasahara would go next. She was very frightened because of this, loudly asked the teacher to stop and said that Riko was much prettier than her. She was indignant because of this and asked, did she decide to set her up? After this, she is still called a friend? She loudly said that she should shut up and do as she is told. Uyama stabbed the knife into the floor, which scared them very much. He looked at them with a frightening look and asked, they will obey the teacher, right? They agreed, and the student asked in a frightened voice to listen. He looked at him and asked, what's wrong? He turned away, looking frightened, and said, it's nothing. He looked at him and asked, maybe he just shouldn't force him? He shouldn't force him to punish him like other students. Hayashi loudly agreed and said that he promised he would behave well. The teacher laughed, praised him, and said that this is how one should behave with a teacher. He grabbed Kasahara's hand and said that it was time for them to go now. She loudly refused and said that she was begging for at least someone to save her. The student, who remained sitting in the room, didn't believe it and wondered, why did this world become like this? The student loudly begged to let her go and asked, does he even know what he's doing? He got angry at her attitude, slapped her face, and loudly said that for her, he was a teacher. He grabbed her by the hair and said that she should be kept for extra classes. He thought that this world had become like heaven on earth. The student, looking frightened, thought exactly the opposite. She thought that the world had come to an end and that many people had lost their lives. He walked down the corridor with a satisfied look and thought that the world had really come to an end, but he was still alive. How come he hadn't figured it out from the very beginning? Since the world was ending now, he could become the king of a new world. At that very moment, the protagonist arrived at the school. Uyama noticed this through the window and asked if this was his car. He became very wary because of this and asked if they had really returned. He got out of the car and said that they had finally returned. Tuya agreed and said that it had been so long since they had been here. He was sure that their news would make everyone happy. The student was happy when she saw them and said that she was very glad that they were alive. The teacher asked with a displeased look, were they seriously able to survive? What should he do? He thought with a very worried look that he was not going to give up this paradise. There was no place for them in his kingdom. Tuya stood in front of the school entrance and loudly announced that they were back and should open the door. He was alarmed by the fact that no one answered, which raised several questions. Uyama returned to the office, looked out the window with a worried look, and thought that everything was very bad. He asked how they managed to survive at all. They could destroy his kingdom, after all. He turned to the students and thought that if they found out that he punished a couple of students, he would not survive, although he didn't even know what condition they arrived in. Besides, the most problematic of them were Nishi and Kurogane. Besides, they didn't know anything yet and didn't see him as an enemy. In other words, he would get rid of the two of them. Then Kujo and Tachibana would become his slaves. He walked up to him with a confident look and said that they should all listen to him. He took the rope with a frightening smile and asked, they will sit quietly if they value their lives, right? At the same time, Tuya was looking at the school building and asked if something had happened. He turned around and asked what they should do. MC, with a serious expression, said that they should go inside. He suggested ramming the entrance. Kotone should take the wheel. She was very surprised by this and asked if he was absolutely sure. He looked at him with a confused look and asked if this was too drastic. Uyama opened the door and said that they were panicking too much. He was very glad that they were all safe. They got what they were going for, right? Tuya went to him, agreed, and said that they fixed the phone and even got some food. On the way, they met a couple of survivors. Tumta called him him and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He was glad that he was okay. The teacher looked back with a displeased look and thought that they had brought another hungry mouth. It would have been better if they had brought the girl. He turned to them, apologized, and said that he was also glad to see him. He thought that they should deal with the strongest ones first. He called Kurogane and Nishi and said that, by the way, before entering, he would like to discuss something with them. They should step aside to talk. Tuya asked if he wanted to talk only with them. Wouldn't it be better for him to talk to all of them? He was a little confused and said that a small problem had happened and he needed their opinion. He asked if that was the case, then he agreed. But what about him? Rikuto, with a calm expression, said that he didn't mind either. Uyama went to the entrance and asked if they were ready to go. Tuya turned around with a smile and asked if they would wait for them here. Kotone agreed, and Tuta said that then they should deal with the luggage for now. Sakura agreed and said that she could already see the happy faces of the others at the sight of the food. She turned around, called Saito, but did not find him and asked, had he already entered the school? At the same time, the teacher with a wide smile walked down the corridor and thought that he did it. Now they were finished. Tuya called him and asked where they were going. He looked at them with a frightening smile, apologized, and said that there was still a little left. He thought that in a closed space he wouldn't be able to do anything with his bow. He would not allow these idiots to destroy his kingdom. He went into the office and said that they should come here. He looked inside and asked, isn't this a very ordinary office? So what did he want to talk about? Uyama approached the fire extinguisher and started saying something, distracting their attention. He pulled out a ring and began to spray the fire extinguisher in their direction. They were confused because of this, and he began to laugh loudly. He ran towards them with a knife in his hand and loudly wished them death. Unexpectedly for him, the protagonist ran up and hit him with a pipe, knocking the knife out of his hand. The teacher was shocked by what happened, and he said with a serious expression that apparently his bad feeling was right. He thought that this could happen, but he didn't expect that they would still decide. He loudly asked how he knew that he intended to attack them. He calmly said that there was a bloody trace on his left sleeve. It's human blood, right? Before they left, there were no traces on his clothes. While they were gone, they wondered how they were doing. However, now everything is obvious. He killed the student. He remembered how it all happened and became very angry about it. Uyama began to tremble with anger, swung his fist, and loudly said that they were just an ordinary problem for him. He didn't have time to do anything because MC struck him very hard with a pipe and threw him aside. At the same time, Saito went out onto the roof where the harpies were eating the bodies of the dead students. He asked why they were grinning at him. He had come to negotiate with them. They were hungry, right? He looked at them with a wide smile and laughed evilly. At the same time, Tuta untied a student and said that she should be patient a little longer. He called Kotone and said that he had freed everyone. She also untied the students and asked, however, why all this happened. Sakura, with a very sad look, handed her jacket to Enomoto and asked what that freak did to her. Hayashi, with a shocked expression on his face, grabbed his knees and said that it was just a dream, a nightmare that would soon end. Kotone began to cry because of what happened and asked, they finally saw a glimmer of hope, but why did this happen? At the same time, Tuya hit the tied-up Uyama hard and loudly asked, does he even understand what he did? He grabbed him by the collar, pulled him towards him and asked loudly, isn't he a teacher? Didn't he say that it is his duty to take care of and protect the students? If so, then why did he stoop to such a level? He started laughing loudly and asked those stupid kids, are they still dreaming of some kind of salvation? They don't even have an idea what it is. They should at least look around themselves. The world has truly come to an end. What kind of salvation are we talking about here? They're going to die sooner or later anyway, and will eventually become food for these monsters. If he is going to die anyway, then why should he hold back because of that? Why can't he have some fun with the beautiful girls one last time? They should understand him, right? He also had an idea. Why don't they have fun together? Tuya swung his fist and loudly told that freak that he should shut his filthy mouth. However, at the last moment, Rikudo stopped him and said that it wasn't worth it. He said with a serious expression that it was a waste of time and effort. Knowing the whole truth about him, they can't take him with them. The student's attention was drawn to his words and she was about to ask something, and he said that she heard everything correctly. Because of all the events, they completely forgot to tell them the most important thing, that they found a safe place. They were all very surprised by this and asked what he said. He said that they fixed the phone, went online and found out the location of the survivors. The students were glad to hear it and said that it meant there was still hope. It meant they were saved. Uyama, with a shocked expression on his face, said that it was simply impossible. He loudly asked them to wait and said that they simply couldn't abandon him to certain death now. He was wrong. Everyone makes mistakes. He repents for what he did and asks to take him with them. The girls looked at him with disgust and refused to believe him. Tuya said with a displeased look that he was causing so much trouble. The protagonist, with a calm expression, said that deciding his fate was not a priority right now. They needed to think about their next steps. He agreed and was about to say something else, but didn't have time because something strange with a loud sound appeared in the sky. A beam of energy hit the floor from there, which attracted their attention. He was surprised by what he saw and loudly asked, what was that just now? They ran to the window and saw how many monsters began to appear in the school courtyard. They all looked at the school and headed there. Tuya looked at this with a surprised expression and asked, Did the monsters crawl out of the sky? MC looked at this and said that it was just like then. Sakura, with a worried look, asked loudly, however, why did this happen? They no longer have phones. He said loudly that he didn't know how, but they were definitely determined to eat them. Tuya said that this was very bad. There were too many of them. Kotone asked loudly, looking worried, what should they do? Unexpectedly, 2 harpies flew into the classroom and attacked a student sitting separately from the others. She was surprised by what happened and started screaming loudly in pain. He became very worried and said loudly that there was no end to the problems. The students started running away because they were very afraid of this. Takeshi ran to the monsters, loudly called out to Tuta, and said that he should help the others escape to a safe place. He agreed, and Rikuto also ran to the harpies and said that he would definitely not die here. Huge crowds of monsters ran to the school and got inside. They continued to fight against the goblins that got inside. They all met in the kitchen, and Tuta loudly called them. Takeshi looked at them and asked, are they all safe? Wait, why are there only 3 of them? Where are the others? He loudly apologized and said that, however, they all ran away in different directions. They asked to take everyone to a safe place, but at that very moment, a goblin started climbing through the window behind him, but Tuya shot at the monster and loudly said that he would only be upset later. The main thing now is to save ourselves. Does he understand that? He agreed, but at that very moment, a harpy flew up to them from the top floor and screamed loudly. The monster flew past Kotone and was flying purposefully towards Sakura. She was very worried about this and was about to ask something loudly about it. The protagonist quickly stood between them and dealt a very strong blow to the monster's head. He turned around and asked if she was okay. She agreed with an embarrassed expression. Kotone looked at the killed monster and wondered if it had just flown past her. Tuya called out to him loudly and asked what they would do. There were a lot of these monsters below. They definitely couldn't handle them all. He looked at them and said that if they didn't go down, then there was only one option left. MC said that they were all going to the roof. This decision surprised them, and he said loudly that they should keep up with each other. They must get to the roof together. Do they all understand? At the same time, Hayashi was running away from a huge spider along the corridor and thought that he did not want to die here. He turned around and thought that he wanted to survive at any cost. Suddenly, he saw a system window that said that his class was a hero. Did he want to start his adventure? He was surprised by this and wondered, what the hell is this? Where's this voice coming from? He agreed with the system's proposal and received a notification that he was granted the Sword of Purification. He thought that for some reason, he felt his body being filled with unknown power. He very quickly delivered several quick blows and killed the spider that jumped on him. He was surprised by what happened and asked, was it him who did all this? Kotone and Sakura came to him and said that he was simply incredible. He will protect them, right? Tuya also ran to them and said loudly that no less was expected of him. Rikuto said that thanks to him, they will be able to survive. Hayashi said loudly that he was grateful to them all. He promises that he will definitely protect them all. In fact, he saw hallucinations while he was being eaten by a spider and thought that it was true. He was their savior. At the same time, Kasahara loudly called out to her friend and said that she should help her. They are friends, aren't they? Riko said loudly that she should shut up because she tried to give her to Uyama. She is not her friend. She was about to say something else, but at that moment a monster came up to her from behind and killed her with one blow of an axe. She looked at it with a very frightened look, laughed nervously and said that this world was just a garbage dump. At the same time, Uyama hid in the toilet and said loudly that he did not want to die. He has to survive. He needs to build his own kingdom. He was about to say something else, but at that moment, Enomoto opened the toilet door. She said with a smile that she had finally found him. He was very surprised by this and asked loudly what she was doing here. She said with a smile that even though he was tied hand and foot, he was still able to escape from the monsters. They say that cockroaches can survive anywhere, right? By the way, what is his dream? He asked with a confused look. Why was she asking about this? She said that she had one such dream. She dreamed of meeting the person she loved, building a family with him, living in joy and harmony. Such a very ordinary dream. She took out a knife and said that now, however, she would not be able to make this come true, because of him, she was completely and utterly dirty. He loudly asked her not to do this and said that he would definitely take responsibility. He didn't have time to finish because she plunged the knife into his body. Uyama fell to the ground and began to scream loudly in pain, and she said with a smile that of course he would take responsibility. How could it be otherwise? And not only for her, but for their entire class, he was responsible as a teacher. He begged her not to do it, and she killed him, laughed and said that she hoped that now they could all rest in peace. A monster ran up to her, swinging his weapon, and she asked, although, what difference does it make? At the same time, the protagonist saw a door leading to the roof and loudly warned the others about it. Tuya loudly called him and asked when they reached the top, what will they do then? He turned around and loudly said that first, they need to get there, and they will think about it later. They entered the door where Saito was standing and said that he was already waiting for them. He was happy when he saw this and asked, so, he survived? He looked at them with a smile and said that all the actors had arrived on stage. He called Kurogane and said that, however, he was especially waiting for him. They still came to the roof. He is grateful that they accompanied him. Tuya, with a puzzled look, asked what was wrong with him. He was about to say, but MC put his hand in front of him and said that something was wrong with him. Dark energy began to emanate from him, and he said that it was very rude. A skeleton appeared behind him, and he said that he was their dear friend. Sakura was very surprised by what she heard and asked loudly, "What kind of ghost is this? What is this anyway?" He looked at it and asked, "Maybe it was a lich?" Tuya asked loudly, "It was a fantasy monster again, but why would it need it?" Saito, with a smile, said that it was his ally. It lent him its body, and he gave it power. The power that allows him to manipulate this world, the mythical summoning system. He looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked what he meant. He said that they would hardly understand with words. It would be better to show it with action. He created a beam of energy from the sky that hit the roof and monsters appeared nearby. They were all very surprised by this and couldn't believe it. Sakura, looking shocked, started shaking Tuta and loudly asked if he had summoned a whole bunch of monsters. He, looking worried, begged her to stop doing this. Rikuto looked at this and thought that exactly the same portals appeared that very day. Saito, looking calm, stood surrounded by monsters and said that this is where his power lies. He can summon as many monsters as he wants. However, this is only the beginning. In the near future, he will be able to summon something more powerful. They understand now, right? With him, they no longer need to be afraid of monsters. He called Kotone and said that he had done a lot of bad things and wanted to correct his mistakes. Now he was able to protect her. She didn't have to rely on that loser anymore. He extended his hand to her and said that they would have to rule this new world. She refused, which surprised him, and he asked why she refused. She said that she couldn't believe it. However, it was all because of him, right? Because of his power, the monsters appeared and everyone ended up in their office. He agreed with a puzzled look and asked what was so big about it. She asked if he had any idea what those monsters had done to their classmates. However, it wasn't just them. Those same monsters had killed a lot of people. He looked at her with a puzzled look and asked what was so big about it. He didn't care about anyone but her. She said with a dissatisfied look that she really didn't want to admit it, but he was no longer human. Goblins, slimes, orcs, she had met a lot of monsters along the way. She can confidently say that he has become like them. Her friends saw her crying, called her, and began to calm her down. Saito also began to cry and said that he was not like that. He was not a monster. He began to loudly refuse to believe it and release a large amount of energy. And Tuya became worried and asked what was happening to him. A large amount of dark energy engulfed his body and released powerful streams of wind. Everyone looked at what was happening with a worried look, and Takeshi asked what this overwhelming force was. Saito transformed. His head changed into a skull with horns, and he loudly asked, "Does she want to stay with him?" If he wants to stay with them so much, he doesn't care at all. That means that every single one of them will die. He sent many monsters towards them. The protagonist warned the others and loudly told the girls that they must run. He ran up to the monster and they crossed their weapons. Kotone called his name with a worried look, and Sakura started to run away. She loudly called her name and warned her of danger. An orc ran up to her and swung his large club. MC managed to run up to her and stop the monster's attack. He misjudged the force of the blow, causing the pipe to bend and throw him back. She became very worried about this and loudly called his name. He flew several meters and hit his back against the wall. The girls ran to him with worried looks and loudly called his name. Kotone sat down next to him and loudly said that she was asking him to wake up. Sakura also sat down next to him and said that he looked very bad. She began to worry and with a frightened look said that he was not breathing. The protagonist entered the subconscious. He thought someone was calling him. But where was he? MC froze in surprise, standing in the room. He turned his head to the side and asked, "Isn't this his room?" But he was at school. Serato asked, "His room? Well, the dead have jokes, of course." Rikuto was stunned and screamed, "Serato could really be here?" Serato smiled and noted that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. At the same time, Kotone, shaking the protagonist's body, asked him to open his eyes. She pressed herself against him with great concern and screamed. The students, with tears in their eyes, said that this couldn't be. Tuya screamed and shot at the monster with his bow. He turned his head to the side in fear and wondered, is MC really dead? Without him, they are all dead. The monster quickly jumped towards him. Takeshi instantly struck the monster with his fist. Tuya looked at his comrade in great surprise. Takeshi sternly noted that the leader was finishing early. No matter what happened, they had to get out of here alive. He was sure Rikuto would have said the same thing. Tuya looked at his comrade with admiration. The comrades called out to Takeshi hopefully. Tuya looked at the monster and said that Takeshi was right. He thought that the protagonist had always been like this. No matter how bad the situation, he was always driven by the desire to live another day. Tuya fired at the enemy and yelled, "How will he look the MC in the eye if he gives up now?" Tuta confidently swung his weapon at the monster and exclaimed that he didn't intend to stand by either. Saito laughed and shouted that it was useless, because the protagonist was already dead and the students couldn't save him. Kotone understood this better than any of them. After all, she always dreamed of becoming a doctor. Kotone tensed up and pressed her fist to her chest. She quickly pressed her lips to the protagonist's. Sakura was embarrassed and thought, is this artificial respiration? Kotone thought that she, too, had no intention of giving up. If the cardiac arrest was caused by the blow to the chest, then there was still a chance to save him. Sakura put her backpack on her back and thought about her comrades trying their best to survive. She shouldn't stand by either. Sakura noted that after the fight with the golem, She was forbidden to make dynamite. But then, what else could she make? She noticed a pipe lying on the floor. Sakura thought, really? The monster is a lich? Her mouth dropped open in surprise. Sakura looked at her fighting comrades and exclaimed that she thought she figured it out. She thought she didn't know how such a monster could even exist from a scientific point of view, and she didn't even know if it would help. Sakura, smiling resolutely, picked up the pipe and exclaimed that there was no choice. Saito yelled that no matter how hard they tried, they would die just like the protagonist. The arrow swiftly struck Saito's head. Tuya smiled and yelled that he needed to be less envious and life would be easier. Tuya happily noted that it was true. It's not nice to envy others. Saito irritably put his hand to his forehead. He raised his hands in anger and yelled that he would survive, and they would go after MC. The monsters rushed into battle, and blood gushed. Serato, smiling maliciously, pinned the protagonist to the floor with his foot and exclaimed that this is how Rikuto should look. The protagonist clenched his teeth in irritation and turned to his brother. Serato asked what MC was saying. He angrily kicked the protagonist's head and yelled, "How dare Rikuto look him in the eyes? The protagonist should have been raised like that from childhood. MC has no future. Unlike him, Rikuto has no talent. Nobody needs a protagonist. Nobody will ever love MC." Serato kicked the protagonist with great force and barked that someone like MC didn't deserve the right to live. It's better to die quietly and peacefully somewhere in an alley. Rikuto, bleeding, thought that this was right. Serato is absolutely right. He is no different from a walking corpse. He has no value. The protagonist is of no use. He just exists in this world. MC tried to live with all his might, but in the end, he achieved nothing. Maybe enough already? The protagonist is very tired. He just wants to get this over with as soon as possible. He has no thoughts or feelings left. MC just needs to close his eyes. Suddenly, the screams of his comrades tore Rikuto out of his thoughts. Kotone took his hand and asked him not to say such a thing. After all, they are all waiting for his return. Kotone, smiling, asked to come with her. The protagonist immediately burst into tears. Serato was very surprised when he looked at MC. Rikuto noted that before he thought it would be better to just die, but now he had those who were waiting for his return. The protagonist quickly grabbed Serato by the leg. Serato raised his fist in rage and screamed, "When will MC calm down?" Rikuto apologized and said that no matter what Serato said, he would definitely survive. The protagonist delivered a powerful attack to Serato's face. His brother gritted his teeth in fear and said that this couldn't be happening. MC, disintegrating into pieces, exclaimed that his past life was over. Rikuto thought that this nightmare would no longer torment him. Now he could return to those who were waiting for him. Kotone was very surprised when she looked at the protagonist, who opened his eyes. MC quickly sat up and coughed. He was surprised to see his friend. Kotone clarified that she had already thought that her efforts were in vain. Rikuto smiled and said that thanks to Kotone, he was able to find the way to her. Wandering in the darkness, all alone, he heard her voice, which was able to motivate him to move forward. The protagonist happily thanked her. Kotone shyly raised her fists and exclaimed that "You are welcome." She thought she didn't understand what he was talking about, but for the first time in a long time, the MC smiled. Sakura jumped with happiness and exclaimed that Rikuto had finally woken up, but tearful greetings for later. Sakura handed him a pipe and asked him to take it. Rikuto looked at the pipe in surprise. Sakura confidently clarified that she had improved his favorite pipe using the reaction of a silver mirror. These monsters are like something out of a book, aren't they? A long time ago, she played a game like that, and there was a skeleton boss. It couldn't be killed with a regular weapon, only with silver. But to be honest, that's how it was in the game. Whether it would work on him, she doesn't know. The protagonist disagreed and said it would work. MC thanked her and exclaimed that Sakura was, as always, reliable. He ran headlong into battle. Kotone smiled and wished him luck, asking him to be careful. His comrades looked at Rikuto running in surprise. Tuya joyfully exclaimed that he had thought the protagonist had died. That made MC worry. Saito angrily called out to the protagonist. MC quickly ran toward the enemy and shouted that they would talk after the battle. They now had a chance to defeat him, but to do that, they had to cover him. Tuya looked in amazement at the weapon in MC's hand. He confidently raised his bow and noticed that that was it. He shot the monster in the head and yelled that it would be done. The protagonist looked in fear at the monster that leaped toward him. Numerous rocks hit the monster and it screamed. Tuta picked up a stone and said that he wouldn't let them lay a finger on Rikuto. The protagonist smiled and thanked them. Saito turned to the MC with fury, pointing his long tail towards the protagonist. Rikuto instantly jumped up, raising his weapon. He asked Saito for forgiveness and pierced his chest with a pipe. Saito screamed in pain and blood gushed from the wound. He yelled that he didn't want to die. Kotone looked at him with great fear. Saito's body began to dissolve. Kotone instantly burst into tears and pressed her fist to her chest. She said she was very sorry. Tuya quickly looked around and yelled, right after Saito was defeated, "Did all the monsters disappear?" "They literally vanished into thin air." "But how is that possible?" Tikshi sternly replied that he thought it was the same situation as with the giant golems. If the boss is dead, then the others are dead too. Tuta looked at his comrade in surprise and exclaimed, "So, that's it." The protagonist let out a tired sigh as he lay on the ground. He exclaimed that fighting desperately for life made him feel especially good about being alive. The friends jumped joyfully after defeating their opponents. And so the day of departure arrived. Tuya noticed that the water and food were all in place. They could finally leave the school grounds. He looked up and noted that he felt strange. The protagonist replied that it wasn't surprising. They had a lot in common with this place. Perhaps they hadn't done enough. Maybe they had another path that could have saved them all. But there's no point in dwelling on that. They need to take care of those who are still alive. Tuya smiled joyfully and said that his comrade was right. Sakura looked at Takeshi with a loving gaze. Tuta confidently exclaimed that they had no choice but to move forward. The MC raised his hand and announced that the next stop was Amashima City. Rikudo and the others set off for the survivors' stronghold, Amashima City. Hope burned in their hearts that they could finally find a safe place, but a powerful enemy awaited them. Meanwhile, the Gargans lay on the ground. The hunter Fuyusa Ginko stood among the dead enemies. She quickly attached a letter to a pipe with her sword, stating that their nest was in this area. You can't look them in the eye, you need to use a mirror. She rode her motorcycle forward at high speed along the highway. Several days have passed since they left school and headed to Amashima. Along the way, they encountered various monsters. And as they found out, not all monsters are aggressive towards humans. The protagonist is sitting in the car with a map in his hands. Tuya asked with interest where they are now. MC pointed to the map and replied that judging by it, they are somewhere here now. Tuya happily noted how quickly they are moving and that they have enough gas. Rikuto said that his comrade looks restless. Tuya replied that he is thinking about many things. The protagonist inquired about what. Tuya asked if MC remembered how he told him earlier about his little sister. MC agreed and said that he remembered. Tuya explained that due to family circumstances, he and his sister were separated in childhood. But fortunately, his sister lived near their destination. He hoped that she was able to successfully evacuate, but considering what their world had become, he had less and less hope. Kotone looked worriedly at Tuya, who was sadly looking out the window. The protagonist closed the map and asked his friend not to worry. He was sure she was fine. Tuya asked in confusion what gave him such confidence. MC smiled and pointed out that she was his sister, which meant she was just as strong as Tuya. A fool like Tuya managed to survive longer than many others, which meant there was no point in worrying about it right now. Tuya added irritably that he was hearing this from a fool, but his friend was right. There was no point in thinking about it now. Tuya smiled confidently and, leaning his hands on the seats, said that they should first get to Amashima. Isn't he right? His comrades laughed and agreed with him. Takeshi looked out the rear window of the car. He yelled tensely that his comrades would talk later. The enemy is coming for them. His comrades screamed in fear. What does this mean? Tuya stuck his head out the window and looked at the enormous wyvern flying across the sky. The wyvern roared with fury and his comrades screamed in fear. Tuya asked in fear, "What kind of flying lizard is that?" Sakura exclaimed with great fear that it was a huge wyvern flying straight at them. Tuya turned his head to the side and asked Kotone to go faster. She agreed and instantly pressed the gas pedal. Kotone quickly turned the steering wheel and asked her comrades to hold on tight. The car spun to the side at great speed. The wyvern turned in the air and headed after the car. It raised its wings and flew faster. Tuya pulled his head out of the car and shouted that the wyvern had also accelerated. Sakura, grimacing from the powerful airflow, screamed that the wyvern was getting closer. The wyvern hovered over the car and roared. The car shook and the comrades grabbed their heads in fear and screamed. Tuya pointed at something and asked Kotone to look at it. He screamed that there was an interchange ahead and ordered Kotone to get off the highway right now. Kotone calmly turned the steering wheel and replied that she understood everything. The car went down at high speed. The wyvern stopped in the air and roared. The comrades joyfully screamed that they had broken away. The wyvern opened its mouth and flew after the car. The comrades noticed that it did not intend to let them go. Tuya exclaimed irritably that the wyvern was so persistent. And what were they going to do? Rikuto replied that if it was impossible to break away from the wyvern, they would have to shoot it down. Otherwise, if the enemy grabbed them, they would die. Meanwhile, Ginko stood on the fence and looked down. She looked through binoculars and saw the car. She was very surprised to see Tuya. Ginko snorted in irritation and turned her head to the side. She quickly mounted her motorcycle and rode down the highway. Smoke billowed out from under the motorcycle's wheels. The wyvern roared as it flew behind the car. Tuya cried out in fear and said that the enemy was getting closer. Tuta, sitting on the couch, exclaimed that the wyvern would kill them. He tensely fired at the approaching enemy. The arrow hit the wyvern's head and flew off to the side. Tuya sat down in his chair and yelled that he couldn't even hit the enemy. MC calmly said that then they would just have to run. The car rapidly approached the column. The comrades asked Kotone to watch where it was going. They would crash so hard. Kotone confidently turned the steering wheel and the car instantly changed direction. The comrades flew to the side and screamed. The wyvern hit its head on the column and roared. Tuya yelled in admiration, "Well done!" Because the wyvern is so huge, it literally can't turn around in tight spaces. And yet, it was tough. Kotone laughed sheepishly. Sakura clapped her hands joyfully and called Kotone cool. She's a real racer. Tuya looked ahead and his mouth open in fear screamed. He yelled, "What just happened? Why did they stop so suddenly?" Kotone replied that she didn't know. She pressed the gas as hard as she could, but the car wouldn't budge. Rikuto was stunned and clarified. Is that really true after everything they've been through? He wondered if their engine had broken down. The wyvern roared, shaking. It flew quickly toward the car. The protagonist turned his head to the side and ordered everyone to run out of the car. The comrades instantly ran out of the car and scattered. A wyvern flew over Sakura, and she screamed in terror. Sakura fell to the ground and looked at her opponent. She raised her hand in intense fear and exclaimed, "No way!" The protagonist quickly picked her up and ran away. Sakura looked at him, confused. The wyvern opened its mouth and ran after its comrades. Takeshi instantly shoved a stone into the enemy's mouth. MC turned and called out to his comrade. Tuya fired his bow and exclaimed that they needed to act now. He thought it would be accurate at this distance. Tuya interrupted his thoughts, and the arrow pierced the wyvern's eye. The enemy raised its head and roared in pain. The comrades ran to the sides at great speed. Tuya asked, "What should they do now?" MC replied that he didn't know. First, they needed to find a safe place, and then, he fell silent, stopped, and looked up. Tuya worriedly asked, "What happened?" The comrades instantly stopped and looked up. Sakura, filled with great fear, said that this couldn't be happening. Several wyverns flew across the sky. The comrades screamed, "There was more than one wyvern here?" The protagonist clarified, "Have they entered their territory?" Tuya turned his head to the side and warned that it was behind them. They looked at the huge wyvern standing nearby. Tuya screamed that the enemy had caught up with them. MC added that they were surrounded. The wyverns surrounded the comrades. Rikuto covered Kotone and ordered her to run. A bullet flew into the sky, leaving smoke behind. The wyverns looked up in surprise. A powerful explosion thundered over the heads of the comrades, and they covered their faces with their hands from the bright light. The wyverns quickly flew upward and roared. The protagonist asked in surprise, "Did they really retreat?" Tuya screamed, "What was that flash just now?" Ginko stopped the motorcycle and noted that she barely made it in time. She calmly leaned against the vehicle. The comrades joyfully exclaimed that she was human. Finally, at least one survivor. Ginko raised her weapon and said that they were wyverns. They love everything shiny and, like birds, collect everything that's lying around. But this flare gun won't distract them for long. They'll be back here very soon, which means it's time to leave. Kotone looked at her with admiration. Ginko turned her head to the side and ordered them to go faster. Or do they want to become monster food? Tuya asked. What should they do? She didn't seem very friendly, but she saved them. MC said that in this situation, there was no choice. Tuya smiled and replied that that was also the right thing to do. Ginko snorted in irritation. Her comrades quickly ran after her. After a while, Tuya, standing in the underpass, asked Sakura to come here faster. She ran tensely towards them and screamed. The wyvern quickly flew up to her and roared. Sakura exclaimed in fear that she wouldn't make it. She couldn't. She instantly ran into the passage and a wyvern stuck its head inside. Sakura, breathing heavily, said that she almost died. Ginko noted what kind of little fools they were. Because of them, all her plans had failed. Tuya yelled, "Why are they fools right away?" Ginko smiled and replied that only complete fools would drive a car through an area filled with wyverns. Sakura asked, what else could they do? They didn't know they were here. Tuya noted that she didn't even know them. The protagonist stood in front of his comrades. He clarified that he didn't know why Ginko decided to help them. MC smiled and thanked her. Ginko snorted in irritation and turned her head to the side. Tuya looked at her and asked where she was going. Ginko asked them to follow her and then they would see. The comrades tensed and MC ordered them to go. After a while, the comrades looked around. Rikuto asked if she was sure it was safe to go this way. What about the monsters? Ginko replied that it was safest. They dealt with everyone here. They were going to Amashima, weren't they? They weren't the only ones heading there. Tuya was surprised and asked, "There's another group?" Ginko agreed and added that they had passed before them. A large group, and unlike their comrades, they were armed. For the most part, Sakura joyfully exclaimed that this was very good. There were even more survivors. Kotone smiled and remarked that this was very good news. Tuya said he was afraid they wouldn't meet anyone, but it seems so. He looked at the protagonist in bewilderment. Ginko turned her head to the side and looked at the girls. After some time, Sakura asked tiredly, "Will it be soon?" Her legs were already giving out. Ginko replied that it wouldn't be long. The comrades asked if there was really light ahead. They looked with admiration at the people sitting in the room. Tuta exclaimed in surprise, "So that's the same group?" Sakura asked, "Have they set up camp underground?" "That's very clever." The comrades climbed up and Tuya looked away in surprise. He wondered what this oppressive atmosphere was all about. Ijima called out to Ginko angrily. He asked irritably, "Is she kidding?" Ijima grabbed her by the shirt and clarified that she had clearly been told to go hunting. Why did she come back? Ginko screamed in pain and turned her head to the side. Ijima asked ominously, "Has she completely forgotten what happens for not following the rules? Or maybe she'll be dragged straight to bed instead of hunting?" He raised his fist and yelled, "Why don't you shut up? Did you bite your tongue?" The pipe came closer to his face. The protagonist confidently ordered him to let her go. Ijima turned his head to the side and asked, "Who is this?" A hand grabbed his shoulder and Ijima gritted his teeth in pain. He turned his head to the side and looked at Takeshi. Ijima yelled, "Who are they? What kind of rebellious look is that?" He smiled and clarified, "Are there animals in their ranks who don't respect the rules? They're gonna get it for this." The bandits raised their weapons and ran toward their comrades. Hizaki ordered them to stop immediately. Ijima looked at him in fear. Hizaki asked, "Is this how they make people obey the rules?" Ijima yelled in irritation. "Those freaks!" Hizaki smiled terrifyingly, and Ijima, interrupting himself, exclaimed, "Nothing." He apologized to his comrades. Hizaki asked them to forgive Ijima for his behavior. Apparently, the comrade was so upset that they returned from the hunt with nothing. And who will they be? Tuya tensely scratched the back of his head. Hizaki raised his hand to his chin and asked if they were also heading to Amashima. His comrades confirmed this. Hizaki smiled and exclaimed that if that's the case, then they can help each other. So what do they say? Would they like to join their group? And with their combined efforts, they can reach Amashima. The protagonist exchanged glances with Tuya. Sometime later, in the station office, Hizaki said he was glad to lead them to the monastery. He was the leader of this group and was glad to meet them. Tuya asked, would the leader explain what was going on here? Hizaki replied that he understood they had many questions. He suggested taking everything in order. They would start with the day of the disaster. Most of the people in this country died that very day. And this is not surprising. Monsters began crawling out of every phone. They quickly swarmed the entire country. The defense forces were not prepared for something like this. This incident could not have been predicted. Modern society collapsed in one day, and judging by the rumors, military facilities are now occupied by giant dragons, just like from some fairy tale. Most likely, the entire army was destroyed. Kotone, frightened, said that this could not be. She kept thinking that the army would return for the living. Sakura screamed, saying that they were left in complete horror. The protagonist scratched his chin and thought that this was somehow strange. Why was a nest of such powerful monsters located on military bases? It was as if someone deliberately chose this particular place to live. If you remember, they personally encountered a force capable of summoning monsters into their world. Mythical summoning system. He thinks that's what it's called. What they do know is that most of the monsters came out of phones, which is what caused the disaster. But is that true? What if there's someone behind all of this? But who would want to plunge the world into chaos? Hizaki said he would continue. Humanity is gradually dying out. There are of course survivors, but not as many as they could notice. They managed to re-establish communication and get online. That's how they learned about Amashima and the survivors, as they also managed to find out not all cities were affected by the disaster. There are also those who weren't affected, and Amashima was one of them. This city is their last hope. Tuta shouted, hopefully that if they got there, they would be safe. Sakura agreed and said that at least they could breathe easy there. MC confidently noted that it was impossible to get into Amashima from the outside. Is that right? Hizaki replied that the protagonist was absolutely right. They must have encountered winged monsters, wyverns, along the way. Rikuto agreed and clarified that the silver-haired girl had saved them. Hizaki explained that there was a wyvern nest right above them. To get to Amashima, they had to travel along the road they guarded. No matter how hard they tried to get past them, the moment the wyverns saw a person, they immediately attacked. But on the ground, even using the train tracks, they couldn't reach Amashima. Tuya asked in surprise, why? The leader replied that monsters also lived underground. For example, a giant worm. A couple had already fallen victim to it. The protagonist clarified that even here it wasn't safe. Hizaki explained that they discovered that the worms were afraid of too much light, so they'd set up camp here. It was much better than up there. Sakura put her hands to her head and exclaimed that it was still like they were trapped. Tuta asked, what should they do then? Hizaki told them not to worry. He confidently raised his fist and exclaimed that they had a plan. Sakura screamed joyfully. Is this really true? The leader said that's why everyone in their group plays their assigned role, for a common goal, so they don't want to cooperate with them. Tuya sternly asked what the MC thought. Rikuto replied that they had little choice in this situation. Tuya agreed and clarified that in this situation, they should unite. He turned his head to the side and asked, comrades don't mind, do they? Hizaki happily thanked them and said that then they would do the work. Ginkgo interrupted him and said, hunters. The leader was surprised, and Ginkgo clarified that they were short-handed, so they would need them. Hizaki noted that it was quite dangerous work, but necessary in their situation. It's decided the boys will be the hunters. Tuta exclaimed in fear, saying he didn't want to do dangerous work. Hizaki added that girls shouldn't be doing something so dangerous. Ginkgo glared at the leader. Hizaki raised a finger and said that they should just go to work. Ginkgo interrupted him and yelled, diggers! They already have enough people working in the kitchen. The leader pointed out that diggers were a pretty difficult job. However, they shouldn't be allowed in the kitchen either. Let them work as diggers. Sakura and Kotone were stunned by this. Sakura irritatedly asked, do you really mean working in the ground? It would be very easy in the kitchen. Will they be able to handle it? Ginkgo ordered the boys to follow her. They would immediately go on their first mission. Tuya agreed and asked her name. Ginkgo smiled and told him hers. Tuya asked, and what is their job? Ginkgo clarified, hunting. What else? Because of them, she lost her prey. They will all work together to make up for the lost catch. Kotone called out tensely to Rikuto. The protagonist said that they would definitely return alive. Kotone agreed and asked him to take care. Ginkgo calmly asked, were they finished talking? She ordered them to follow her, and the comrades agreed. The comrades resolutely prepared for the hunt. After some time with Minamiyaza, in a city neighboring Amashima, it became a nest of wyverns, and the people were forced to hide underground. But there were problems there too. A man called out to his comrade and asked if they should slow down a little. They actually have women and children here. The comrade called him a fool and asked, the man wants the monster to catch up with them? The last thing they need is to run into that freak. The people screamed, and the man asked, is that an earthquake? The worm instantly crashed through the ceiling, and the man screamed in horror. The Minamiyaza Amashima line became home to an underground worm. At the same time, Ijima noted that there was horror underground, and horror above ground too. They had no choice but to barricade themselves in the station. And then Hizaki came up with the idea to revive this place. Tuya clarified, what do you mean revive? Ijima grinned ominously. He exclaimed that they could simply kill this worm with a train and go straight to Amashima. Luckily, they managed to find a train at the nearest station. However, it was buried under rocks and definitely needed repairs. But for now, they were trying to dig it out. Tuta tensely imagined the girls and noted that this is what excavators do. Will everything be okay with them? Ginko looked down thoughtfully. The protagonist turned his head to the side and noticed her. Ijima ominously clarified that while they were trying to dig out the train, they were going hunting. Tuya asked, so hunters are people who get supplies by going to the surface? Ijima laughed terrifyingly and replied that it was true. Tuya was a smart guy. He understood everything right away. They were an elite unit. The lives of all the inhabitants depended on their results, so they weren't playing around here. Tuta screamed in great fear. He noted that hunting was very scary. Tuya asked if these words weren't inspiring. Rikuto replied that they weren't particularly so, but they don't have much choice. It's profitable for them to work with them to get into Amashima, so they'll do what they're asked. Tuya clarified that they'll have to, apparently. They're just doing their job. It's not for them, the newbies, to judge them. The protagonist scratched his chin, looked down, and added that it was still somehow strange. Why were they so happy? Tuya asked, but wasn't it obvious? They were returning to the surface. MC noted that that was exactly it. They were heading to the surface, to the wyvern nest. A person could meet death there at any moment, but they seemed indifferent. They were so eager to fight, although it would be more logical to impose this dangerous activity on someone else. Tuya thought for a moment and said that, if you think about it, there were whole arguments in the school about who would go check out the situation on the lower floors. Maybe it's all thanks to Hizaki? He seemed like a charismatic leader. MC turned his head to the side and added that something else was bothering him. The monster that blocked their passage to Amashima was a worm, right? Then why him? Ijima interrupted him and yelled, what are they talking about? They've already reached the station. Tuya sternly said that it looked like they had no choice. Ijima headed forward and his comrades stayed behind. They climbed the stairs. Ijima turned his head to the side and said that they finally reached the exit. He sternly raised his weapon and ordered everyone to listen here. It's very simple. They use a flare to distract this flying monster, and then they take everything in sight. That's all the hunters do. However, they don't have many flares, they can't waste them. Ijima grinned ominously and asked, how do they know where these freaks are and how many of them there are? MC asked what Ijima was hinting at. Ijima announced that they would go on reconnaissance. After all, they were supposedly their allies now, so they had to show their worth. Or would they give up and admit that they were useless pieces of trash? The comrades became very angry. Tuya asked sternly, what will they do? Rikuto was right about them after all. They would eventually become food for the wyverns. The protagonist looked down thoughtfully and covered his mouth with his hand. He confidently said that then, first. Ginko interrupted him and said that she would go. They wouldn't mind, would they? MC looked at her in surprise. Ijima irritably asked why she was clinging to them. She was too kind to them. Ginko replied that it wasn't about kindness. Scouts are a responsible role. If they ruin everything, they will put everyone else at risk. She doesn't want to die because of the newcomers. Rikuto confidently said that he would go too then. Ginko calmly asked, is he really deaf? She'd said they, the newcomers, would only get in the way. Ginko sighed mockingly and asked, or what? Does he really want to play the noble knight? The protagonist pointed out that it wasn't a question of nobility. He thought it was better to go on reconnaissance together. At worst, one of them could serve as bait for the monsters. She cared about the success of the operation, didn't she? Wasn't that a reasonable decision? Ginko snorted in irritation and turned away. She clarified, does he mean he'll obey her unquestioningly? Rikuto replied that if he had to for the sake of success, then yes. Tuya called out to his comrade and exclaimed that if the protagonist was coming, so was he. MC replied that everything was fine, asking his comrades to wait for him here. Rikuto smiled and clarified that he had no intention of becoming food and would definitely return alive. Ginko came upstairs and said, less talk, more action. 15 minutes had passed since the reconnaissance began. Ginko knelt down and wondered if it was safe to stay in this narrow alley. At least the wyverns wouldn't get through. The protagonist looked at her in surprise. He asked what she was doing. Ginko let out a tired sigh and said that the mandrake is essentially a plant, a monster. If MC tries to pull it out, it will emit a loud scream. Those who are too close to the mandrake can die from its scream. Rikuto remembered something and said that he remembered a mandrake was shown in a movie once. Ginko wrote on the ground with a knife, warning them not to pull it out. The protagonist was stunned and wondered if she was writing a warning on the ground. So, all those writings. He paused and remembered the warning left by Ginko. She stood up and pointed out that MC didn't know anything about this world. Why did he even volunteer? If Rikuto wanted to play the hero in front of a woman, he should stop. It looked bad. The protagonist replied that he had no intention of playing the hero in front of her. He wanted to gain their group's trust, and if that meant taking a risk, he was willing to do so. The group's power and possibilities were absolute. Staying here was essential for survival. MC thought that thanks to Takeshi's presence, the others weren't bothering them much anymore. The protagonist smiled and asked if that wasn't a reasonable reason. Ginkgo closed her eyes and snorted with a smile. Leaves flew quickly away from the powerful gust of wind. Ginkgo turned around with great speed and brought her foot to MC's face with the intention of attacking. Rikuto instantly slid backwards. Ginkgo angrily screamed that his concept of rationality made her laugh. She turned around in the air and approached the protagonist. She leaned her hand on the ground and jumped up. Ginkgo kicked, but MC managed to raise the pipe in front of him and block the attack. Ginkgo landed multiple attacks. Rikuto thought that her speed was simply unbelievable. As for her fighting skills, they were pretty mediocre. All she was doing now was trying to knock the iron pipe out of his hands. The protagonist calmly lowered the pipe and froze. Ginkgo sternly grabbed him by the jacket. She threw him to the ground with great force. Ginkgo brought the knife to MC's neck. Ginkgo knelt down and noted that, as she said, he was very weak. She instantly jumped to the side. Ginkgo grabbed the fence on the balcony with her hand. She jumped to another building. Ginkgo landed on the roof and said that MC would only get in the way. She ordered him to return to the others before the wyverns noticed him. Rikuto asked her to stop and exclaimed that, no matter how strong she was, it was reckless to go alone. Ginkgo deals with monsters and these are too dangerous. He doesn't know where she's been or what she's seen, but her arrogant attitude could cost her her life. Ginkgo smiled and clarified, has he already forgotten who defeated him a second ago? She doesn't intend to listen to the advice of the weak. Ginkgo ordered him to return to the others, and she will go. She quickly jumped to the side. The protagonist calmly looked up, clenching his hand into a fist. After a while, Ginkgo looked through the binoculars. She noticed that there were only 3 wyverns. There weren't that many of them. It seemed this part of the area was still safer than others. Ginkgo calmly exhaled, lowering the binoculars. She looked at the map and said that they were lucky this time. There weren't very many of them, so if they moved quietly and out of their line of sight, they could safely pass and get the supplies. Ginkgo jumped down and announced that reconnaissance was complete and it was time to return. She hoped the fool had made it here on his own. Although, given his strength, maybe she shouldn't have let him go alone. Ginkgo bounced off the balconies and landed on the ground. Looking at the map, she thought that this path seemed to lead to the station and was more or less safe. Ginkgo noticed a wyvern standing behind the wall. 3 small wyverns stood in front of her. Ginkgo screamed in surprise. Were they really small wyverns? She'd never seen anything like it. Ginkgo looked at the wyvern eggshells in amazement. The enemy rushed toward her and roared. Ginkgo was terrified when she looked at the wyvern and remembered her past. The protagonist screamed that no matter how strong she was, it was reckless to go alone. Ginkgo dealt with monsters, and these were too dangerous. Ginkgo thought she didn't expect anything from anyone. She quickly jumped away from the pipe and looked at the wyvern. Ginkgo sighed tensely and clutched her wound with her hand. She thought that everyone around her saw her as strange. Her hair and eye color, Ginkgo's exceptional physical abilities. She grabbed the pipe with her hand and screamed. Ginkgo instantly flew down. She thought that she never had anyone she could rely on, and it had always been like this. Ginkgo remembered the past. The students were talking about something with smiles on their faces. The students, sitting on their desks, burst into laughter. The girl raised her hand and clarified, isn't it because of Ginkgo? How she irritates her. She agreed and exclaimed that because Ginkgo has a pretty face, her self-esteem is very high. Although Ginkgo's hair and eyes are creepy. And have the students heard? Ginkgo also sells her body. After a while, a scream was heard from the playground. A boy sitting on the ground noticed that you couldn't tell that Ginkgo was a girl. She ordered the bullies to disappear, and they quickly ran to apologize. Ginkgo asked how the students were. She and the students were fine. The student shook with fear and interrupted Ginkgo, asking them not to touch her. With tears in her eyes, she called Ginkgo a damned fool. Ginkgo looked sternly at the ground, and the students walked away. She thought that everything was right. No one cared about her, and Ginkgo stopped expecting anything good from people. She came out of her memories and raised herself up, leaning her hands on the ground. Ginkgo thought that she had always lived like this, and would live like this until the end. She remembered the past. Ginkgo's mother, Fuyuse Yukina, asked her daughter not to worry. Ginkgo was such a good girl. Someday, there will be people in her daughter's life who will be able to see this in her. They will become Ginkgo's true friends. She came out of the memories, and the wyverns quickly flew towards her. Ginkgo sadly thought that her mother was wrong. After all, in the end, she will meet her own death alone. The protagonist quickly hit the wyvern with a pipe. Ginkgo was very surprised to see him. She screamed, "What is he doing here?" MC firmly ordered her not to move. He put his hand in his jacket and thought that it was good that he took it with him. Rikuto quickly pulled out a flare. He lit a flame on it. The protagonist quickly ran, picked up the flare, and yelled at the wyverns to follow him. The wyverns turned their attention to him. Ginkgo worriedly turned her head to the side and called MC a fool. Bright things attract wyverns. The monsters quickly ran after the protagonist and growled. Rikuto thought that so far everything was going according to plan. That way he could lead them there. The wyvern growled with fury as it approached the protagonist. It raised its tail, intending to attack. MC instantly blocked the attack with a pipe. Blood gushed from the wound on his cheek, and Rikuto snorted in pain. He jumped aside and thought that the wyvern was fast, much faster than an ordinary person. But that didn't mean he had to stop. The protagonist ran quickly, and the wyvern growled yelled, looking at him. MC looked at something in surprise and stopped. He noted that he had only expected to meet baby wyverns. Huge wyverns flew across the sky. Rikuto, looking up, said that it seemed like the adults had come to their screams too. The wyverns looked down and growled. They quickly flew towards the protagonist. MC tensed and prepared to attack. Blood instantly gushed out. At the same time, Ginkgo exhaled heavily, lying on the ground. She sadly raised her head and asked what he was trying to achieve by driving them away from her. Ginkgo fell into a stupor and said that it was impossible. Does the protagonist really want to sacrifice himself? Black shadows filled the sky, but these were not the shadows of birds. The wyverns quickly flew after the protagonist. MC, with great effort, runs away from his opponents. He exhaled heavily and thought that there was very little left. He needed to hold on, and if he made it, Rikuto froze and snorted, finishing his thoughts. The wyvern roared and instantly approached the protagonist. It attacked and MC fell to the ground with blood gushing from his leg. Rikuto shook in pain and thought that he could not get up. Is this really the end? He instantly fell into a stupor, noticing something. The wyverns flew towards him at high speed, intent on attacking. The protagonist smirked and said it looked like he had no choice. The wyverns stopped due to a powerful gust of air. A loud scream echoed throughout the city. Ginkgo froze in surprise upon hearing it. She instantly fell to one knee and covered her ears with her hands. Ginkgo fell to her knees and let out a sound of pain. She lowered her hands and noticed that this roar, could this really be a fool? Ginkgo paused and exclaimed that it was a curse. After a while, Ginkgo noticed that it had to be here. She looked at MC, lying surrounded by wyvern corpses. Ginkgo noticed that they were all dead. Rikuto pulled out the mandrake while in the midst of the scream. He died of shock. She even left a message not to touch the mandrake, and the protagonist decided to sacrifice his life to save her. MC opened his eyes and quickly rose from the ground. Ginkgo screamed in surprise when she looked at him. She shook and screamed loudly. Ginkgo screamed, "Why is he still alive?" Blood started coming out of his ears. She froze, realizing something. At that moment, Rikuto realized he was in a hopeless situation. Before pulling out the mandrake, he hit himself in the ears with great force. Due to the high air pressure, his eardrums burst. Having lost his hearing beforehand, MC was able to avoid death from the mandrake's thunderous howl. Ginkgo asked in amazement, did he really deprive himself of his hearing on purpose? She thought, how stupid do you have to be? The protagonist gritted his teeth in pain and blood gushed from his ear. Ginkgo clenched her fists and called him a fool. She held his hand and exclaimed that it was true. She had never seen such fools in her life. The eardrum could be repaired and hearing restored. But who in their right mind would do that? Rikuto looked at her in bewilderment and said nothing. Ginkgo screamed furiously that he was lucky the protagonist couldn't hear her at all. She calmed down, exhaled, and clarified that she could tell a madman like MC how it all started. Why monsters invaded their world. The protagonist looked at her, and Ginkgo began her story. She paused and asked if it was okay to tell him everything. Ginkgo raised a cross and said that the secret was about to be revealed. After a while, people started screaming. Are they really children of wyverns? That was very bad. Ijima irritably ordered them to stop dramatizing. Although if nothing is done, many could die. They needed to reconsider their hunting strategy. Ijima, smiling, punched MC on the shoulder and remarked on how clever the protagonist was at coming up with that. He likes crazy people like Rikuto. The protagonist can consider himself proven. Ginkgo angrily ordered Ijima to leave MC alone, considering the protagonist was already wounded. Tuya calmly remarked that, frankly, he wasn't even surprised that Rikuto had done that. Reckless, as always, although MC can't even hear him, right? 2 weeks have passed since that hunt, since they joined the group of survivors. Once the protagonist lost his hearing, Ijima began to respect him. Rikuto's original goal was to gain the group's trust. Since then, he and the others have stopped being treated with disdain. However, working as hunters was full of dangers. They faced death every day. Ginkgo recognized MC as an equal, and now they fight as comrades. He has another friend Rikuto can rely on. As for Sakura and Kotone, it's not easy for them to work as diggers, but they try their best. Although the hardships of this current life are difficult, they unite them all, so they continued to fight for their own lives. However, the protagonist was constantly bothered by a strange feeling of discomfort that reigned around him. Time passed, and MC still couldn't figure out what was causing the discomfort around him. Tuya turned to his comrade and asked if his ears were definitely okay now. Rikuto replied that one could say so. His hearing still wasn't as good as before, but it was slowly returning. Tuya remarked that, in any case, he was glad that the protagonist could at least hear what was being said to him, and he kept wondering how they were supposed to live underground like moles. MC turned his head to the side and asked, "Who knows?" Tuya clarified, "Is that all the comrade could say?" He turned his attention to Ginkgo standing in the crowd. Tuya asked who she was talking to. The girls screamed in fear. How could Ginkgo say such a thing? Ginkgo asked, what else could she do? She just had to do it. The girl ordered her to stop, and a loud sound echoed in the room. She slapped Ginkgo on the cheek and exclaimed that every time she did that, the girl was starting to hate it all. It was as if she was being shown a reality she couldn't change. Although how could Ginkgo know that? After all, Ginkgo was in charge of the hunt. A huntress couldn't understand what they were feeling. Tuya raised his fist and yelled, "What are they doing?" Ginkgo stood up and asked them to ignore it. Tuya worriedly replied that then he would mind his own business. He thought she always spoke like that, and that she was somewhat similar to the protagonist. It was no wonder they were able to get along. MC remarked that it was strange, and his comrades looked at him. Rikuto clarified that Ijima and his friends were always in high spirits. but compared to them, everyone else around them was in a terrible, depressed state. Like, for example, those girls who just ran away from here. The mood in the group has been pretty tense lately, hasn't it? Is something brewing? Ginkgo confirmed this and replied that bonuses would be handing out soon. Tuya was surprised and clarified that he had heard about them from Ijima's friends. Those who worked hard would receive rewards from Hizaki. Ginkgo added that, more importantly, she had something to talk about with the protagonist. Tuya quietly asked if she had really decided to confess her love to the MC. Ginkgo sternly grabbed Tuya by the hair and noted that she had been closely watching Rikuto for the past 2 weeks. Perhaps the protagonist could be trusted. She asked him to follow her. Meanwhile, in the mine, Sakura asked if her leg hurt much. Kotone, sitting on the ground, disagreed and replied that everything was fine now. Thanks to the bandages Hizaki brought her, she thought she might be able to walk at least a little. Sakura joyfully exclaimed that this was very good. She was so scared when she twisted her leg. They were lucky that Hizaki turned out to be such a nice person. Kotone, smiling, said that it was true. Some time ago, Hizaki said that, as expected, the girls were not handling the excavator's work, but they need not worry. He will redirect them to the kitchen. Hizaki thinks they will be much more useful there. Currently, Sakura enthusiastically raised her hands and shouted that they would be able to cook in the kitchen without any problems. You can say goodbye to the dirty trenches. Kotone looked away tensely and thought, but why was everyone looking at them with pity? Sakura called out to her and offered to tell the others everything. After some time, they stopped in front of the tent entrance and exclaimed that here they are. Tuya turned his head to the side and asked if they had finished work yet. The protagonist asked what Ginkgo wanted to talk to him about. Ginkgo calmly exhaled and clarified that she wanted to talk alone. But since MC insists, then fine. She will get straight to the point. They are interested in knowing the whole truth about the disaster, aren't they? In other words, how it all started. Tuya yelled in surprise. How did she know that? Ginkgo said that she didn't know everything either, but she knew exactly how it all started and with whom. There is a culprit who started it all. His name is Surato. The protagonist and Kotone were stunned by this. Ginkgo remarked that they were probably related after all. At first, she thought they just had the same last name, but it seems the world really is a small place. Tuya asked in surprise if the protagonist had an older brother. He didn't even know. MC agreed and clarified that he had a half-brother. Tuya exclaimed in amazement that he hadn't thought the white-haired guy was Rikuto's older brother. Surato bullied the protagonist, didn't he? MC calmly replied that it was all in the past, anyway. Kotone sadly placed her hand to her chest and remembered Surato beating the protagonist. MC raised his hand and clarified that he just couldn't understand how Surato could have caused all this disaster. It just sounded absurd. Ginkgo noted that it wasn't surprising. If she hadn't known everything, she wouldn't have believed it either. But she's sure of one thing. Surato was the key figure in causing the disaster. Let's flash back to exactly 1 week before the disaster. Ginkgo is lying on the couch looking at her phone. She's surprised and notices that it's him again. Ginkgo thought about slimes, golems, wyverns. She's died from them many times before, but now everything is different. Ginkgo knows the weaknesses of each of them, and now she can definitely defeat them. Slimes are weak to fire, and you need to hit the golem with E right in the head. Wyverns love everything shiny. You can simply distract it and quickly move on. But the one she has a problem with is the Lich. He's much stronger than those she's fought before, but even he has a weakness to silver. If you pierce him with a silver spear, he will die. Ginkgo happily cried out that finally. She smiled and said that the game Mom made was really addictive. You have to think about every battle, and the levels aren't that easy. Ginkgo quickly put on her jacket and screamed, did she really spend that long playing this game? She's really late. The game Mythical Summon System was open on her phone. Sometime later in the hospital, Ginkgo, walking down the hallway, looked away and said that Mom's room should be there. She fell silent, noticing the door was slightly open. Surato asked if that was her final answer. Yukina sadly confirmed it. Surato, smiling, asked if she even realized that he was FN's largest shareholder. Yukina sternly said that she knew very well who he was, but her answer would remain the same. She left FN a long time ago. Yukina was an ordinary woman who didn't have much time left anyway. He just had to leave her alone. Surato laughed and yelled, so that's what a genius programmer FN is? She's one of the few people he respects. The mythical summoning system. It's the foundation of FN. Yukina was the one who created it. She doesn't have to worry, she just has to give him the game. Surato will provide her with the best care, the best doctors from all over the country. Doesn't that sound tempting? Yukina lowered her head and said nothing. Surato clarified, was she still resisting? He addressed her as a sign of respect. But the mythical summoning system, like the entire company, already belonged to him. The materials Yukina left behind before resigning would be enough to launch it. Very soon, she would see their world change radically, and Surato would be the one to start these changes. He hoped she wouldn't regret refusing. Yukina looked at him calmly and said nothing. Surato walked past Ginkgo and laughed. Ginkgo walked into the room and asked, who the hell was that idiot? Her mother was happy to see her and noted that her daughter had decided to stop by today. Yukina replied that that wasn't so important. What's more important, was Ginkgo at school today? Her daughter immediately began shaking with fear. She turned her head to the side and replied that she hadn't. Her mother asked, why not? Ginkgo irritably crossed her arms and exclaimed that she was surrounded by idiots in class. School was so boring. Yukina agreed and said that her daughter was different from others. But with that attitude, Ginkgo would never make friends. Ginkgo snorted in irritation. Her mother put her fingers to the corners of her lips and asked her daughter to smile. She asked Ginkgo not to forget to smile. A smile attracts people and puts her in a good mood. Ginkgo sheepishly asked her mother to stop. It was shameful. These friends are nothing but trouble. She lives very well on her own, without them. Yukina clarified with a smile. Her daughter lives well alone. So why does Ginkgo help those who need help? Her mother laughed and asked her daughter not to worry. Ginkgo is such a good girl. She is sure that one day, her daughter will meet people who will understand her, and Ginkgo will make very good friends. The daughter sighed tiredly and asked her mother to stop. She suggested they talk about something more exciting, like a game her mother made a long time ago. Yukina clarified. The mythical summon system? That brings back memories. And how far has her daughter come? Ginkgo joyfully exclaimed that today she finally defeated the Lich, the boss of the northern region. Her mother shouted with great happiness that it was amazing. It seemed she made it quite difficult. Ginkgo interrupted her and clarified that she defeated him in the end. And yet, this game is really cool. Even though the monsters are classic, they change after each rebirth, and it's set in modern times, something she's never seen before. What appeals to Ginkgo most is that there's no magic or other cool fantasy elements in this game. To win, you have to use your wits and the tools at hand. Ginkgo asked irritably if her mother had modeled the heroine Sylvia after her. Yukina laughed and exclaimed that she thought she'd been found out. Ginkgo shouted that even though the game wasn't finished, if it came out now, it would be a huge hit. Her mother asked if her daughter really thought that. Ginkgo raised her finger and said that, come to think of it, this game really was missing a final chapter. How would her mother like to finish the game? Yukina smiled tensely and after apologizing, replied that it was a trade secret. Her daughter eagerly asked her mother to tell her story. Ginkgo thought she probably didn't have much time left to spend with her mother. That's why she decided to spend every free minute with her. But suddenly, the end of this world came. Ginkgo stopped in front of a multitude of monsters. She asked with great fear, how is this possible? She couldn't believe her own eyes. People were being killed, burned, it was pure chaos. This was a new reality that Ginkgo's brain couldn't accept. She looked at what was happening, amazed, and asked, what's going on here? She noticed the phones lying on the ground. Ginkgo screamed. So monsters crawled out of the phones and started attacking people, and then there were all these monsters. It felt like she'd seen them before. Lizardmen, black dogs, harpies. Those were definitely enemies from the game, from the mythical summoning system, the game her mother created. Ginkgo was stunned, remembering her mother. She ran quickly and shouted that she had to find her mother immediately. Knowing Yukina's condition, she couldn't have gotten far from the hospital. Ginkgo stopped and turned her head to the side. Hearing a scream, a student sitting next to the corpses of her comrades asked for help. Ginkgo remembered how the student shouted at Ginkgo not to come near her. Ginkgo snorted in irritation and ran toward the student. She remembered her mother and noticed that the monster turned its attention to her with fury. It ran towards her at great speed and raised its weapon. Ginkgo was stunned, thinking that these monsters really wanted her dead. This wasn't a game anymore. This was reality. The monster swung its weapon with force. Ginkgo fell to one knee and thought that she needed to pull herself together. If this was the same goblin from Mom's game that she killed in droves, then their weak spot hadn't changed. She kicked the goblin between the legs. He screamed and fell to the ground. Ginkgo instantly ran towards the second enemy. She struck the goblin's neck and thought that they were certainly a little stronger than an ordinary person, but they had little endurance. If she dealt with them one by one, they wouldn't do anything to her. The goblin looked fearfully at the approaching Ginkgo. She quickly wrapped her arms around his neck. Ginkgo pressed her hand on the goblin's neck, and he instantly fell to the ground. She turned around and, looking at the student's corpse, said that she was too late. Ginkgo gritted her teeth in fear and asked her for forgiveness. She picked up her knife and ran to the side. Ginkgo thought that wherever she looked, hell had literally appeared on the city streets. But she walked forward, no matter what. For her mother's sake, Ginkgo prayed to God that Yukina was alive. Ginkgo resolutely plunged the knife into the monster's body. She let out a tired sigh and exclaimed that there were a lot of freaks in the hospital too. Ginkgo ran down the hallway at high speed, thinking about her mother. She quickly opened the door and called out to her mother. Ginkgo looked at the empty ward and screamed, "Isn't she really here?" There were no corpses or traces of blood in the ward. Maybe her mother had escaped? Her daughter noticed sounds coming from the closet. Ginkgo opened the closet doors and looked at her mother. Yukina, looking at her laptop, screamed that she had relaxed too much. If only she hadn't. She paused, and Ginkgo turned to her mother. Yukina shouted with great tension that she didn't think he would be able to bring this world to life. She underestimated Surato. If everything goes as she supposes, all the phones and computers around the world will fail. But she was lucky. She had a laptop with an isolated network. With it, she can do it. Ginkgo interrupted her and called out to her mother. Yukina was very scared and looked at her daughter. Ginkgo joyfully exclaimed that thank God, mother was alive. They need to run, now. There is chaos everywhere. It's not safe here. Yukina looked sadly at the computer screen. She said sadly that she can't. She has to do something very important. After all, everything that is happening now is her fault. Ginkgo furiously grabbed her mother by the shoulders and, interrupting her, shouted that she didn't understand what Yukina was talking about. But they need to get out of here right now. These monsters are real. They will kill mother. Yukina took her daughter's hand and replied that Ginkgo was right. They had to leave. It was too early for her to die. The monster's huge tail rose up. Ginkgo looked in fear at the monster that had broken the wall. She screamed, "It's a giant scorpion. It's one of the game's difficult bosses. And why did it appear here of all places?" The scorpion placed its paw on the laptop. Yukina fearfully extended her hand and screamed. Ginko raised her hand and ordered her mother to step back. Yukina burst into tears and the scorpion raised its paws. Ginko raised her knife and thought that she had to protect her mother, no matter what. Yukina turned sadly to her daughter, and Ginko ordered her mother to stand aside. She could handle it. Ginko thought that it had a hard shell. Such agility in its movements that she couldn't always predict its next move. She doesn't even remember how many times he killed her in the game. But Ginko knows his weak spot, his brain. There is one specific place on his head where the shell is much thinner. One hit and the scorpion is finished. But just one mistake and he will either rip her apart with his pincers or sting her with poison. What to do? Maybe she can get around him? Yukina covered her mouth with her hand and coughed. She cried and asked for forgiveness. Ginko thought that no, if she were alone, maybe she could escape, but her mother would not be able to do that. So there was no choice. The scorpion approached and hissed. He quickly raised his pincers. Ginko thought that she needed to act now. Strike his head with one precise blow while he was swinging. Ginko jumped and instantly tripped over a stone. She shook, looking down. Blood spurted to the sides. The knife hit the scorpion's head and Ginko thought that she missed by a little. The claw approached Ginko's head and she fell into a stupor. The scorpion quickly grabbed her with its claw. Ginko screamed in horror and coughed up blood. The scorpion raised its tail with a sting. Ginko wondered if this was the end. The scorpion attacked and Ginko looked at what was happening in horror. Mom smiled with blood dripping from her mouth and turned to her daughter. The scorpion's sting pierced Yukina's body. Mom put her hands on the sting and grunted in pain. Ginko looked at her with great fear. She burst into tears and screamed that this couldn't be. Ginko quickly plunged the knife into her opponent's body. The scorpion raised its claws and screamed in pain. Ginko jumped up, intending to attack. Screams came from the hospital. The scorpion's corpse lay on the floor. Ginko, holding her mother by the back, asked her to hold on. That's right, an antidote. They need an antidote. It wasn't in the game itself. This blow was considered a fatal attack, but first they need to stop the bleeding. And then, Yukina raised her shaking hand and interrupted her daughter. She smiled, put her hand to her daughter's cheek, and asked her to calm down. Ginko burst into tears and exclaimed that it was all her fault. Yukina apologized and, coughing, said that it wasn't so. She was to blame for everything. Because of her, many people died that day. Yukina was so sorry. Ginko screamed in bewilderment that she didn't understand. Yukina confidently said that her daughter had to take it. She threw a cross into her daughter's hand and clarified that there was a memory card inside. This thing contains the whole truth about this catastrophe, and it is humanity's only hope. Ginko must go to Amashima and find the FN branch. Ginko screamed that she knew who was behind all of this. A demon in the flesh, Serato. She understood everything. The daughter asked her mother just not to waste her energy like that. Yukina turned to her daughter with a smile, and Ginko asked, "What is it?" Her mother, with the last of her strength, said that she loved her. Ginko was her precious daughter. Ginko thought that she had hoped to be ready for the day when she would see her mother take her last breath. Yukina asked for forgiveness and said that her daughter would now have to bear this burden alone. She instantly lowered her head and closed her eyes. Ginko burst into tears and thought that, holding her mother's cold body in her arms in this bloody hell, she felt herself consumed by despair. In the present, Ginko said that this is how it all began for her. Kotone sadly noted that it was too much to survive such horror. Tuya clarified, so all the answers were hidden in Amashima? Tuta asked if they arrived in the city, would they find the answers to how to save their world? Sakura said it was hard to believe such a story. Ginko calmly replied that they could believe it or not if they wanted, but she had already made up her mind. The protagonist confidently raised his hand and said he believed Ginko, and he wanted to go to Amashima with her, if she allowed it. Ginko took his hand and called him a kind madman. After a while, Ijima asked how the leader was doing this month. Hizaki smiled and replied that they had made significant progress. They had tried very hard. He closed the book and clarified that everyone who had worked hard this month would be rewarded. Hizaki grinned ominously and added that the reward would be bonuses. Several days had passed since their conversation with Ginko. Ineda noted that they had earned bonuses this month. He couldn't wait for the payout. He turned his attention to the people and asked his comrade to look at their sad faces. Ineda shouted, smiling, that he'd heard that those who didn't receive their bonuses would be sent to cultivation. His comrade smirked and exclaimed that Ineda was being harsh with them, of course. Rikuto thought that these bonuses were supposed to encourage those who worked hard, but the atmosphere around them was oppressive. For some reason, those who maintain order are often terrible people. In the group, everyone is fed equally, both men and women. No conflicts arise because of this. Everything would be fine, but the people around them, why are they so scared? Should they ask Ginko about this? The comrades noticed the scream. Ineda grabbed the girl, Sana. She fearfully apologized and said that they had pushed her and her food. Sana didn't finish, and Ineda's comrade laughed. He asked, what's wrong with her? They were friends. Would they really fight over something like this? MC sighed sternly and thought that these guys were still getting a little too far. Tuya irritably said that he should intervene. The protagonist agreed. Tuya confidently ordered Ineda to leave the girl alone. The man approached the protagonist and ordered them to stay out of this. Rikuto looked at the man ominously, and he became very scared. A comrade stood behind the man and ordered the protagonist not to get cocky, Yes, they had helped the group well and were in good standing with the boss, but that didn't mean they could act like this. Aneta asked his comrades to calm down. It was better not to disturb the order. He approached Sana and apologized to her. They were just joking. Sana clenched her fist in fear and looked down. Aneta moved aside and ordered his comrades to leave because he was hungry. His comrades became angry and shouted that these jerks needed to be put in their place. They were getting too cocky. Aneta grinned ominously and ordered them to leave them alone. They would soon learn the order the boss had established. Tuya asked, what were they even talking about? MC extended his hand to Sana and asked if she could stand up. Sana, with tears in her eyes, shook in fear. Sana's father hit Rikuto and ordered the freak to get away from his daughter. Tuya was stunned and asked, how is he? Sana asked her dad to stop and yelled that they, on the contrary, saved her. They are not bad. Dad decisively raised his fist and asked his daughter to step back. He knows very well that they are just like everyone else. The protagonist asked, is this her dad? If dad saw everything, why didn't he come and save his daughter from the very beginning? Isn't it a parent's duty to protect their own children? Dad angrily ordered MC to shut up. He raised his arms to the sides and yelled that Rikuto knows nothing. Sana wrapped her arms around her dad's body and asked him to stop. Thanks to the hunters, she and Dad are alive. And she's okay. Dad can see, right? That's why she asks him to stop. Dad knelt down and hugged his daughter, asking for forgiveness. Tuya put his hand on the MC's shoulder and suggested they leave. At the same time, the guy put his hands to his head in fear. He lowered his head in dismay and screamed that this couldn't be happening. This time, they'd send him to be raised. Kotone, smiling and holding a tray of food, asked if he was feeling unwell. The guy noticed Kotone's happy expression. He shyly raised his hands and replied that everything was fine. Kotone remarked that she was glad to hear it. She offered him something to eat. The guy fearfully asked her to stop. He clarified, she works in the kitchen, right? Kotone, surprised, agreed and replied that she did starting today. The guy smiled and noted that even she had been sent there. Kotone said that, unfortunately, she couldn't help the group anymore, so she would try her best. Sakura happily raised her hand and screamed that they needed to hurry, because Rikuto was waiting for them. Kotone replied that she was already running. The guy, holding a plate, remarked that she was very beautiful. He laughed madly and said that eventually she would too. After some time, the MC said that something was wrong here. They had been living here for about half a month, but he couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Tuya calmly agreed with his comrade. He crossed his arms and noted that the atmosphere in the group was becoming more uneasy every day, so much so that he didn't want to stay here anymore. Tuta clarified that it all started with the bonuses. What are those anyway? The protagonist looked at Ginkgo and said that she had been here longer than them. What does that even mean? Ginkgo lowered her head. Sakura, smiling, holding a tray in her hands, yelled that they must be hungry. Kotone noted that they had worked very hard today. Tuya happily thanked them. Tuta smiled and exclaimed that he really was very hungry. Ginkgo asked with great fear why they were delivering food. Kotone replied that from today they were working in the kitchen. She recently injured her leg while working as a digger. Sakura added that Hizaki kindly redirected them to the kitchen. She apologized and said that her comrades worked hard every day and they couldn't even do a proper job as diggers. Tuta raised his hand and said that sending them to dig the mine in the first place was a bad idea. Ginkgo was extremely angry and thought Hizaki was a jerk. She ran for the exit, deeply worried.